Chapter 784. In the forest, a group of about 500 people was traversing through the forest. A group of armored guards protected a few of them in the middle. Among the people in the middle, there were two people who were dressed particularly conspicuously. The two of them were actually wearing silk clothes with silver patterns that reflected light from time to time. Compared to the sorry state of the others, although the two of them looked tired, they were still considered neat. "Master Qi, how much longer do we need?" asked the leader of the group, turning to the middle. Of the two people who were being protected in the middle, the older one was holding a square plate in one hand. On the square plate were a few pieces of jade. He stroked his beard with the other hand and said, "We will arrive within 10 days. The leader let out a long sigh of relief. That's good. Even though they were prepared, when they really entered this forest, they were almost always on edge and did not have a good night's sleep. They were afraid that they would be eaten by the ferocious beasts hiding in the dark or be dragged away by those strange plants. This forest was much more dangerous than the forest they had entered on the other side of the sea. When they first entered, there were about 800 of them. Now there were only about 500 left. The remaining 300 had become fertilizer for the plants or food for the fearsome beasts. This was even after they had avoided most of the dangers with the guidance of the 2E family members. If it had not been for the 2E family members and they had entered the forest alone, the number of people who would still be alive could be counted on one hand. "Let's take a break. There are no major dangers around here," said the man with the plate. The surrounding guards let out a long sigh of relief. They could finally rest. However, although the E family said there were no major dangers, they still had to be careful of the small dangers that could pop up at any moment. If they were too careless, any small danger could cost them their lives. "Master Yu, do you really not know what those insects look like?" While they were resting, Mu Yao, the leader of the team, asked the only Gongjia member in the team who was also a master blacksmith. Unfortunately, the new king did not like Gongjiayu. Gongjiayu was not doing too well. If it weren't for the Mu and Yi family's protection, Gongjiayu might not be able to continue living a luxurious life. He might not even be able to find the materials to forge. Not far away, Gongjiayu's hair was all white. He was not young anymore and used to have a lot of authority in the Gongjia family. Unfortunately, before the new king ascended the throne, Gongjiayu had mocked and ridiculed him. He had never been nice to him. As soon as the new king ascended the throne, he took away many of Gongjiayu's resources and gave them to other Gongjia craftsmen. After all, there was more than one craftsman in the family. The Gongjia family's craftsmen who worked hard all day couldn't gather much resources. Most of the resources were given by the nobles of the royal city. Perhaps they could last for a few years, but after a few years, they wouldn't be able to continue. After Gongjiayu lost power, the Mu and Yi family continued to support him. That was why Gongjiayu did not fall into dire straits. The Mu and Yi family's support came with conditions. They hoped that Gongjiayu could make better weapons. Rock Hill City's main target was the Mu and Yi family in the royal city. No wonder the two families were so anxious. They wanted to use this opportunity to win Gongjiayu over. Gongjiayu also planned to use this opportunity to turn things around. He had enjoyed a luxurious life for many years and it did not feel good to lose power. If he could handle this well, it was not impossible for him to return to his old life. In terms of craftsmanship, Gongjiayu was considered a master. When he was young, he had been to Xia Valley like Heng and read the secret records left behind by the Gongjia ancestors. That was why he knew what Heng knew. Yinjiao and Rock Hill City had found the green-faced fang beasts, so they knew how good the weapons were. Although it was better than other metal weapons, it was not good enough to satisfy the Mu and Yi family. Since the green-faced fang beasts didn't work, they would try to find the legendary insect. There was very little information in the Gongjia ancestors' notes, but wasn't the Yi family there? As a result, the two sides worked together, and after paying some price, they finally got the location of the insect. Then they gathered people, bypassed the main battlefield by the sea, and avoided the territory of the Flaming Horns tribe, which they had conflicts with before, and came to this forest. I've never seen that insect before. There were only words in the notes, no pictures. Our ancestors called them star butterflies. Gongjiayu had given this answer many times. That was all he could say because he didn't know what the star butterflies looked like. He didn't even know what the larvae looked like. The only thing I'm sure of is that we need to find the larvae before they turn into butterflies. We need to extract their blood and bring it back. Gongjiayu's eyes flashed with passion. If he could make a better weapon, he would definitely be able to turn the tables around. How many years had it been? No one in the Gongjia family had been able to reproduce the information recorded in the notes. Don't worry, it's still a long time before the larvae turn into butterflies, said Ichi confidently. I'm worried that someone might have followed us. If someone did, wouldn't we be letting them off easy? Plus, the people following us might disrupt our plan. Mu Yao voiced his concern. Don't worry, we've shaken them off. Ichi's face was arrogant. He used his divination abilities to point out the team's location and the time of each mission. They managed to shake off a group of people each time. Now they could no longer sense anyone following them. Sitting next to Ichi was another young man from the E family. Strangely, he looked very young but had white hair at his temples. Unlike Ichi's calmness, he was anxious and uneasy. He had a bad feeling about this. Uncle, we still need to be careful, said the young man. Izong, are you doubting my abilities? Ichi was unhappy with Izong's words. He was about to say something when his brows furrowed. Ignoring everything else, he tapped the plate in front of him. The glowing jade rolled for about 5 minutes before stopping. Master Qi, did something happen? Asked Mu Yao and the rest hurriedly. It's fine. I don't know who stole the E family's divination skills, or maybe it's a piece of trash that escaped from the E family. How dare they use divination to find out where we are? You want to fight me? He scoffed arrogantly, expressing his disdain for the person who tried to find out where they were. Then what now? Mu Yao looked at Ichi. That person can no longer find out where we are, said Ichi casually. It's just something the E family's juniors do when they're messing around. Someone knows where we are through divination. Izong was shocked. His eyelids twitched as he thought of something. He hurriedly picked up his plate and grabbed a handful of golden sand from a clay bowl held by a slave. He sprinkled it on the plate. The fine golden sand spontaneously separated into stripes on the square plate. At first it was fine. The fine sand moved normally, either approaching the jade on the plate or avoiding the jade on the plate. However, not long after, this kind of change suddenly stopped. With a soft pu sound, the golden sand in the square plate scattered messily. I can't find out where they are, exclaimed Izong. Usually, if the other party used divination techniques to track them, they could use the E family's secret technique to track the other party's location. Of course, they could also stop the other party from following them, just like what Ichi had done earlier. But there was a variable. If the difference in strength between the two parties was too great, it could result in a one-sided suppression. For example, the other party couldn't track them through divination. This was why Izong was shocked. He was already one of the best in the E family's younger generation, but he couldn't find out where the other party was. Izong's expression changed. His usually calm face was conflicted. It's like this again. It was as if there was a layer of fog blocking his divination. Every time he tried, the result was a mess. The jade array was very messy and he couldn't find anything. Izong had experienced this before. It was a terrible memory. Every time he thought back to it, Izong felt like a pair of hands were stopping him from moving forward. In other words, he had hit a bottleneck. In the past, there had been members of the E family who had encountered the same situation and couldn't move forward. If they couldn't break through the bottleneck and were stuck at this point, they would stop moving forward for the rest of their lives. The E family would also give up on them. Although Izong had encountered the same situation, he was still a rare genius among the younger generation. The E family didn't give up on him and even tried to help him break through. But to no avail. This time, Izong told his family that he was stuck at a bottleneck and couldn't break through. That was why he followed them here. He wanted to take it as a training trip and hoped to get a chance to break through this bottleneck. He didn't expect to encounter such a situation again. Izong picked up the jade from the square plate and turned it in his palm, deep in thought. After a while, he said to Ichi, Uncle, can you predict the other party's movements? Are you doubting my ability? Anger flashed in Ichi's eyes. Izong couldn't divine because his ability was limited. Ichi was ranked in the top 10 of the E family. How could he encounter the same situation as Izong? Izong ignored Ichi's obvious anger and insisted, Uncle, please do it again. Fine. I'll do it for you. Ichi suppressed his anger and picked up the jade from the plate to begin the divination. But soon more and more sweat appeared on Ichi's forehead. His hand holding the jade began to tremble as if he couldn't hold it steady. Izong's face twitched as he watched from the side. Finally he closed his eyes. He already knew the result of this divination. Poof! The golden sand on the plate scattered. Ichi's face was pale. His fingers were still tightly holding onto the jade, but his eyes were fixed on the remaining golden sand in the square plate as if he couldn't believe this result. How is this possible? How can this be? Ichi's lips trembled. Not only can we not know where they are, but we also failed to stop them. There was dead silence in the group. Mu Yao and Gong Jiayu stared at Yi Qi in disbelief. They thought they were hallucinating. What? Even Yi Qi couldn't track them? Even their attempt to stop them had failed. Did this mean the other party could still track their movements through the divination? Who has this ability? Even you can't stop them. Mu Yao couldn't think of anyone else. Could it be someone else from the Yi family? I know who it is, said Yi Zong slowly. Compared to the others, Yi Zong was much calmer. The Yi family rarely used the word guess, because they weren't sure of their abilities. Only when they couldn't get a definite result would they say, guess. But now Yi Zong had said it so calmly. Who is it? Asked Yi Qi, ignoring Yi Zong's choice of words. It's the Yinjiao man, Yinjiao Shaoxian. Impossible. Yi Qi denied immediately. That's the Yi family's technique, I sensed it just now. I don't know exactly what technique it is, but it's definitely the Yi family's technique. Although I don't know how that person mastered the Yi family's divination technique, I think the person who is tracking our movements through the Yi family's divination technique is Yinjiao Shaoxian. Yi Zong had suspected that the Yinjiao people had the ability to perform divination back then when he was hunting down the Yinjiao migration team. But at the time, he didn't think it was the Yi family's technique and guessed that it might be another tribe's divination technique. The Yi family wasn't the only tribe who could perform divination, but the Yi family was definitely the tribe with the strongest divination technique. Now Yi Zong, who was stronger than him, had already said that it was the Yi family's technique. But Yi Zong could sense that this was the same situation as the one he encountered back then. Then, when the Yinjiao tribe migrated, it was highly likely that the Yi family's divination technique was used. Unfortunately, with his current abilities, he couldn't figure out which technique it was. Impossible, absolutely impossible. Yi Qi repeated. He couldn't believe that a tribesman who wasn't part of the Yi family could have this kind of ability. This was a slap to the Yi family's face. If Yi Zong knew what Yi Qi was thinking, he would have told him that this slap had already happened back in the royal city. It was just that no one had noticed. Let's hurry. Mu Yao shouted as he stood up. Since someone already knew where they were, they had to find the larvae and take their blood before they arrived. At this moment, in the forest, somewhere far away from Mu Yao's team, Shaoxian looked at the knot in his hand. It wasn't smooth this time, it felt like someone was tugging at the rope to stop him from tying it. But in the end he still managed to complete it. Calling Cha-Cha, who was pecking at a snake, over, Shaoxian said, "Stop playing. Hurry up and eat. They should know we're coming." "Let's hope they don't do anything rash," Shaoxian said, looking into the distance. He already knew what kind of insect they were looking for. However, the place it lived was too special. It was an important territory for the mountain eagles. Every place where ferocious beasts gathered, there was a delicate balance between the two species. If the balance was broken, would those people be eaten by the huge mountain eagles or the ferocious beasts? Or eaten by the mountain eagles? There seemed to be only one result. Chapter 785. Mu Yao and the rest walked for another 7 days before they saw a mountain range that looked like a wall blocking the sky. Not only was it long, they could not see the end, it was also very tall. Looking up, they could only see that the top of the mountain range was covered by clouds, as if the mountain range had reached into the clouds. Below the swirling clouds, one could see large areas of the mountain covered in white. The white was ice and snow. Long, steep, high, dangerous. This was what everyone thought when they saw this mountain range. In the past they had climbed quite a few mountains, but this time the impact on them was even greater. "This is the first time I've seen a mountain range like this," Mu Yao exclaimed. This was clearly not an ordinary place. It made sense that the star butterfly larva was here. It was only logical for an extraordinary creature to live in an extraordinary place. Thinking of this, Mu Yao felt that the Yi family really did find the larvae. "This is it?" Mu Yao turned to ask Yi Qi. Yi Qi was still trying to figure out who was following them. He did not believe Yi Zong's words. He had been thinking about this for the past 7 days. Now that they were at their destination, he was not interested. He gave a perfunctory Mu Yao looked at Yi Zong. When Yi Zong nodded, he was overjoyed. "What about the larvae?" "It's not time yet," said Yi Zong. "Do you mean the larvae will come out on their own?" Mu Yao was curious. "Probably, we just have to wait." Yi Zong had his slaves clear a spot and sat on the rubbed rock. He took out his tray and began to ponder over his doubts like Yi Qi. Seeing the Yi family like this, Mu Yao did not force them to look for the larvae. The Yi family was always like this, especially the main branch of the Yi family. "Let's see what's around us," Mu Yao said to the rest. Mu Yao was wondering where the larvae were and how big they were when Gong Jiayu closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He looked like he was enjoying himself inside. Do you smell it? Mu Yao sniffed carefully. The stench of bird poop? Bird poop was not a rare smell in the forest, he had smelled it all the way here. Gong Jiayu opened his eyes and looked at Mu Yao like he was an idiot. The larvae must be here. Why can't I smell it? Mu Yao sniffed again but could not smell anything else other than bird poop. He turned to look at the rest of them, who shared his confusion. You don't understand. Gong Jiayu looked proud. I can sense excellent forging materials around here, it must be the larvae. Gong Jiayu, Gong Jiayu, Gong Jiayu, Gong Jiayu, you Gong Jiayu, Gong Jiayu, Gong Jiayu, Gong Jiayu, Gong Jia, Gong Jiayu, Gong Jiayu, you Gong Jiayu. This was one of the reasons why the Gongjia ancestors discovered that beast blood could improve forging quality. As he spoke, Mu Yao felt a gust of wind above his head. He looked up to see a black shadow falling towards him. He quickly dodged. But the sound of something heavy falling alerted everyone who was searching for the larvae. They looked towards the source of the commotion warily. There was a huge eagle, several times taller than them when it laid on the ground. It was like a small mountain, the trees around it had been knocked down. However, it looked heavily injured. Mu Yao looked from the eagle's beak to its feathers to its claws. He concluded, an old eagle. It was an old eagle. Although its eyes still had the sharpness of an eagle, its sharp beak and claws, which were supposed to be its powerful weapons, were no longer the same as they were in their glory days. It was as if they were rusty, inferior metal weapons that could no longer be used. Knowing that it was an old and heavily injured giant eagle that couldn't even fly, the threat it posed to them was limited. After seeing the situation clearly, everyone's tense nerves relaxed a little. But then they thought, this is also a good opportunity. An old eagle that was about to die was still a ferocious beast giant eagle. It was good food. They had never hunted such a big eagle before. Mu Yao understood everyone's thoughts when they looked at him. He had the same idea, but to be safe he asked the Yi family. Will killing the eagle affect the larvae? Asked Mu Yao. Yi Chi looked impatiently at Eagle, who was not far away. Kill him if you want to. Yi Zong fiddled with the jade in his plate. I think it's best not to do that. What? What did you find? Asked Mu Yao. Yi Zong shook his head. Nothing. Afraid that the others would misunderstand that they couldn't perform the divination because of what happened, Yi Chi explained, there's something strange about this place. We can't perform the divination. You should be able to feel it too. Indeed. Mu Yao knew the Yi family wasn't looking for an excuse. He could feel the pressure from above, like a giant hand was pressing down on him. Since he couldn't perform the divination, Mu Yao didn't want to let go of the meat that was right in front of his mouth. He drew his sword and prepared to kill the eagle. This was where the larvae lived. Eagles and insects didn't seem to coexist peacefully. Killing the eagle might be beneficial to the larvae. The eagle seemed to have sensed Mu Yao's murderous aura. It flapped its wings and looked over, its gaze so sharp that it was hard to look straight at it. A giant eagle of this size had to have been through a lot. Just its gaze was different from the other birds Mu Yao had met on his journey. But the more it was like this, the more Mu Yao wanted to kill it. Oh man. The sword light flashed, carrying a cold murderous aura, and without any pause it slashed out. Clang. The giant eagle blocked Mu Yao's attack with its claws. But one of its toes was cut off, pieces of the claw falling off. Just as Mu Yao thought, the eagle's claw was a rusty metal that was about to be obsolete. It couldn't take a single hit. Perhaps, when the eagle was at its peak, the sword might not have been able to cut off the eagle's toes so easily. It might have only been able to cut through the hard scales on the outer layer of the toes. But wasn't the eagle already old? Could an eagle that was about to die of old age return to its youth? The others gathered around. The giant eagle realized that it couldn't stay here any longer. It raised its claw to block Mu Yao's sword and flapped its wings. Crack, 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 crack. The sound of branches snapping could be heard everywhere, as if a rainstorm was falling on the ground. The wind created by the eagle's wings was like a hurricane, slowing Mu Yao's steps. Screech. With a long screech, the giant eagle flapped its wings and took off from the ground. Perhaps due to its old age or its injuries, it seemed much clumsier. Mu Yao thought it would crash down again, but it only flew up, then stopped at a spot on the mountain. Its claws clawed at the steep cliff, but because of its injuries, its claws were no longer sharp and slid down a long distance. Mu Yao considered climbing up the mountain to continue killing it. The eagle didn't look like it had much time left. Just as he was thinking, Gongjiayu roared, "The star butterfly larvae are out." Now Mu Yao couldn't care less about the giant eagle. He had more important things to do. He would kill the old eagle after he got the worm blood. Where are they? Mu Yao looked around. I can feel them, they're out. Gong Jiayu breathed heavily, his face flushed. Blood rushed to his face uncontrollably, steam rising from his skin. He held a sword in his hand, his eyes fixed on the ground at the foot of the mountain. In this aspect he was more sensitive than the Yi family. The Yi family had to perform divination for information, but he did not need to do that. This was the Xia's natural instinct. They're here. As soon as Gong Jiayu finished, Mu Yao heard a rustling sound that seemed to come from underground. Everyone held their breaths, afraid of disturbing the movement. The sound grew louder and louder. Gong Jiayu was looking at the ground near the foot of the mountain. The ground beneath the grass loosened and the ground protruded. A white round head poked out of the ground and crawled out. Its body was 3 to 4 meters long and as thick as an adult's thigh. There's more than one. Gong Jiayu grew excited. After the first white worm emerged, other long snow-white worms emerged one after another near the foot of the mountain. It's them? Chapter 786. White star butterfly larvae crawled out from the ground. Although there were differences in size, there was not a huge difference. One was less than a meter long while the other was more than 5 meters long. Gong Jiayu was like a hungry beast smelling blood at the sight of this. The excitement in his eyes was palpable, as if he wanted nothing more than to capture all the white worms and let them bleed. It was as if he could see a golden, glorious path laid before him. His chance to turn the tables was right in front of him. Clang. Unsheathing his sword, Gong Jiayu charged towards the nearest worm. Catch them? Mu Yao snapped out of his excitement and ordered his men to get to work. Their ultimate goal was to get these white worms. The sharp blade cut through the white worm's body, but there was no sound of breaking. The sword felt like it had cut through a tree full of resin. The blade seemed to be blocked, only leaving a shallow mark on the worm's skin. Even Mu Yao did not manage to cut through the worm's body as he expected. Just now he had been able to cut off one of the eagle's toes with his sword, but now he couldn't even cut off this little white worm. However, although he did not cut the worm in half, he did cut open its skin. White liquid flowed out from the worm's wound, dripping to the ground and seeping into the soil. Just as Mu Yao was about to slash at the opening, the white worm nimbly rolled to the side, avoiding his sword. There were white marks on the ground, blood from the larvae's wounds. However, the blood quickly seeped into the ground. Mu Yao noticed that the larvae's wounds had stopped bleeding and were healing at a visible rate. The speed of their recovery was simply too fast. It was hard to break its skin, it healed quickly and dodged quickly. Although these larvae did not have gaping mouths or sharp horns, they were troublesome to deal with. Someone near Mu Yao noticed this too. He was about to say something to Mu Yao when a white shadow flashed past, fast as lightning. The star butterfly larva that he had just injured had its front end pressed tightly against the ground. Nearly 2/3 of its body had turned into a thick and heavy white whip. Its fierce attack swept towards that person with the power of the wind. That person didn't expect the seemingly harmless white bug to suddenly attack him. Before he could react, an intense pain spread from his abdomen to his brain. The larva hooked its 3 pairs of thoracic legs to the ground, twisting at an unbelievable angle and lashing out. The person who was sent flying directly flew more than 30 meters away. After landing on the ground, he slid back for a distance before stopping. If it weren't for the grass and trees on the ground blocking him, he might have flown even further. After landing on the ground, the man curled up like a shrimp and spat out blood from his mouth. He groaned in pain and could not get up again. Mu Yao dodged the white whip. These white worms were not easy to deal with, but a few more slashes would kill them. Gong Jiayu crouched down and touched the white marks on the ground. They were from the worm he had just injured. He rubbed the soil stained with white blood and suddenly thought, "Don't use it." Gong Jiayu suddenly shouted, "It's not blood." "What do you mean?" asked Mu Yao. "It's not worm blood that can be used for forging," said Gong Jiayu. Mu Yao was confused by Gong Jiayu. "It's not blood? Didn't you say it's worm blood? Are you kidding me? My deepest respect to your ancestors. It's not blood, but it must have something to do with these worms." Gong Jiayu paused. "Use a net. Catch them first." First, he would capture the bugs and then slowly study what exactly they were. Mu Yao's anger subsided when he heard Gong Jiayu. As long as it was the worms, the Gong Jia family could figure out if it was blood or not. The net Gong Jiayu mentioned was not made from vines or grass ropes like the tribesmen usually used. It was a net Gong Jiayu made himself before he came. Every thread on the net was a metal that had been specially processed. It was more flexible, but it was not easy to break. The thickness of the thread was less than 1/10 of the thickness of a pinky finger, and it was lighter than other metal of the same size. This made the Mu and Yi family members gasp in amazement. The Gongjia family's masters all had many treasures hidden away. They just did not usually show them to others. Gongjia Yu was only willing to show his treasures because of the larvae. This was his invention. To date, no one else knew how to make this mesh. This was also the trump card Gongjia Yu planned to use to compete with the other blacksmiths for the title of Gongjia's best blacksmith during the Gongjia family's gathering. Unfortunately, he did not make it to the meeting. Instead, the royal city changed and the Gongjia family was divided into several factions. He was pushed out. At Gongjia Yu's words, one of his slaves opened a large wooden box on his back and took out rolls of animal hide. He opened the hide to reveal a glowing silver net. Mu Yao did not waste any time tossing the net to someone else. These nets were specially made by Gongjia Yu. Unlike fishing nets, these nets were made to catch worms. Many unnecessary parts were removed to save space and weight. The net wrapped around the front of the white worm's body. The opening of the net tightened, covering the worm's head and the bulge behind its head. The thread connecting the opening of the net was extended and held in the hands of the person who cast the net. They controlled the tightness of the net. The trapped worm did not stop moving. After rolling a few times, it continued to climb towards the mountain wall. It was impossible for one person to pull the white worm. Therefore, each net was pulled by 6 or 7 people or even more. Alternatively, they could tie the net to a nearby tree or rock to save a lot of effort. Quick, quick, quick. There are more. Catch as many as you can, shouted Gongjia Yu anxiously. He realized that the worms had no intention of fighting them. Instead, they were heading towards the mountain wall. Many of them had already climbed up the mountain wall and were climbing upwards rapidly. Although Gongjia Yu did not understand worms, this was clearly not a coincidence. There must be a reason. They did not come all the way here to see accidents happen. They had already caught 7 larvae. Some of them went to look for vines and the like. When the larvae got tired of struggling in the metal net, they replaced them with vines. Only then could they free up the metal net to catch more insects. Some of them also had to attract the larvae's attention so that the person holding the net could cast the net easily. Otherwise, they would not be able to get up immediately after being whipped by the tail. This way, the number of people they could use was limited. Gongjia Yu turned to look at Yi Qi and Yi Zong, who were watching from afar. They each had 4 to 5 slaves with them. Gongjia Yu wanted to ask them to free up a few slaves to help, but the 2 of them looked completely uninterested in catching worms. Both of them were frowning as they stared at the trays in their hands, ignoring the battle. Gongjia Yu swallowed the words he was about to say. Forget it, he could not count on them. Weren't the Yi family also in a hurry to find more powerful weapons before coming here? Why did they not seem to care now that they were here? We brought too few people. However, they were not sure if they could find what they were looking for, so they did not bring too many people. They thought they would only find 1 or 2 larvae. Now Gongjia Yu regretted it. If he knew there would be so many larvae, he would have brought an army. Although there were many larvae, they were not all in the same place. They were scattered far apart. This was one of the reasons why they were not very efficient at catching worms. Quick, quick, quick. Gongjia Yu could not stand still when he saw all the worms running up the cliff. He sheathed his sword and climbed up the cliff. Mu Yao and the rest did the same. They planned to get the worms down and let the people with the nets catch them. However, they soon discovered that the mountain walls here were not that easy to climb. They were colder and harder than the mountain walls in other places. Furthermore, the higher they climbed, the more difficult it was to climb. It was as if there was a force pressing down on any creatures that tried to climb up. However, the white worms crawling up the mountain did not seem to feel the pressure. Their backs arched into the shape of Omega, then climbed up into the shape of 1, and then arched into the shape of Omega. There were 3 pairs of legs on their chest, abdomen, and tail. The hooked legs allowed the clumsy white worms to climb up the mountain wall. In comparison, Mu Yao and the rest who were chasing after them paled in comparison. This was not going to work. The worms were faster than them. If they continued, they would be left behind. Gongjia Yu also realized this problem. He looked at the cliffs on both sides and fixed his gaze on one spot. That fat one? Mu Yao looked over. There was a white worm not far away. Although it was about the same length, it was obviously thicker than the rest. The other worms curled into a circle while it curled into a ball. It had a lot of flesh and blood and crawled slower than the rest. Who else could they catch? They might even be able to make it roll down the cliff with a flick of their sword. That's it. Catch that fat one. There were too many targets and they had limited manpower. These star butterfly larvae were not easy to catch either, so they had to catch them one by one. Perhaps sensing Mu Yao's intentions, the fat worms sped up, preventing Mu Yao and the rest from catching up. In the end, they gave up on chasing the fat worm. When they reached a suitable place to rest, they would stop to replenish their food and water and recover their energy before continuing their climb. From time to time they would encounter cliff-like mountain walls. If they could climb, they would climb directly. If they couldn't, they would take a detour and find a less steep place. Mu Yao looked up. They had climbed a long distance. Any higher and the cliffs were covered in snow. They could not see any greenery and the peak of the mountain was still out of sight. All they could see were swirling clouds. A gust of cold air rushed into their lungs, almost choking them. The wind was stronger and colder, but they were not even halfway up the mountain. If they continued, they would encounter even colder conditions. Mu Yao looked at Gongjiayu. He knew Gongjiayu would not give up. He did not want to either. It was rare for them to be here, especially in a situation like this. Even if they could not catch more worms, if they could find out why they were climbing, perhaps they could discover more secrets or treasures, it would be worth it. Didn't they say there were treasures in mysterious and dangerous places like this? Mu Yao's blood boiled at the thought. The rest of them thought the same, but no one complained. Although it was cold, their gazes were fervent. Treasures? What kind of treasures would there be? On the way here, they had hunted many ferocious beasts, and the animal skins they were wearing were the fur of those prey. However, gradually, the thick animal skins on their bodies began to be covered in white frost. Moreover, the higher they climbed, the greater the area covered by the frost. Their hair and beards were also not spared. How high is the peak? Mu Yao sighed. Just as he was thinking, he felt a strong gaze on him. He turned and saw an eagle resting on a cliff about 100 meters away. It was the one he had killed on the ground. But Mu Yao's target was the worms. He wasn't interested in the eagle for now. He glanced at it and continued climbing. But the eagle's gaze was too intense, making Mu Yao furious. What are you looking at? I'll chop your head off if you keep looking. Mu Yao roared at it. With that, the eagle stared at Mu Yao even more intensely. Mu Yao's temper flared up. Since they were all hungry, they might as well kill an eagle halfway and eat something before continuing their climb. He was about to order his subordinates to move when he heard an eagle's cry. Whoosh! A strong gust of wind blew from above, causing small pebbles to fall from the cliff. Mu Yao and the rest squinted from the wind. They looked up to see an eagle perched on the cliff not far above them, clinging tightly. It was much smaller than the eagle but still huge compared to a human. It was not an eagle. It looked young, its beak was not as curved as the eagle's and its claws were sharp and powerful. However, Mu Yao's attention was not on the eagle. He looked up at a protruding rock. There was a person standing there. A tribesman? Asked Mu Yao. Yin Jiao. Gongjia thought the person looked familiar. Mu Yao's eyes flashed when he remembered what the Yi family said. You're Xiao Xian from the Yanjiao tribe? Mu Yao was not part of the main force when they hunted down the Yanjiao tribe, so he had never seen what Xiao Xian looked like. He only guessed based on what the Yi family said. Yi Zong and Yi Qi said someone was following them. Yi Zong even said confidently that the person was Yanjiao's Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian did not answer them directly. Instead he said, You're brave, how dare you fight here? Mu Yao raised his brows, wary of Xiao Xian. Can't we? Xiao Xian glanced at them. This is the giant eagle's land of faith. Mu Yao and the rest were stunned. Xiao Xian did not look like he was lying to them. Giant eagle? What the hell was land of faith? Wasn't this the star butterfly's territory? A giant eagle? How old was a giant eagle? Like the one just now. Just as he thought of the eagle, Mu Yao realized that it was resting on the mountain wall. It flapped its wings and flew up. Before it flew up, it glanced at Mu Yao. The talons with two broken toes moved a little. Then it looked back up, no longer looking down. Mu Yao felt like he understood the eagle's gaze the moment their eyes met. It was saying, just you fucking wait. Chapter 787. Mu Yao stared at Xiao Xian in shock. It wasn't that he doubted Xiao Xian's claim that this was the giant eagle's land of worship. He knew that Xiao Xian was on a different side from them and had conflicts with them before. Before Yanjiao crossed the sea, they were hunted down by the royal city's army. Most of their team had participated in the hunt. Even those who weren't directly involved did so indirectly. Yi Zong, who hadn't climbed up the mountain, was also a direct participant. It would be strange if Xiao Xian treated them well. That was why Mu Yao's guard was up. If even the Yi family couldn't stop this tribesman, what was he after? Just to warn them? Looking at the surrounding environment and terrain, they were on a steep hillside. There were many mountain walls that were almost perpendicular to the ground. If they were not careful, they could directly roll down the mountain. Xiao Xian chuckled at their wary gazes. I'm not the one you should be wary of. Mu Yao did not say anything, but he thought to himself, who else can I guard against? You must be hoping for all of us to die. If Mu Yao was in Xiao Xian's shoes, he would have thought the same. That was why he did not let his guard down. Instead, he stared at Xiao Xian even more cautiously. It's about to begin. Xiao Xian looked up at the sky. There was no angry roar, no murderous intent in his eyes. Xiao Xian's tone was calm, but it sent chills down Mu Yao's spine. He panicked for no reason. He looked up and saw clouds that looked like they were within reach. A chill seeped into his lungs, sending chills down his spine. It was even more chilling than before, as if something terrible was about to happen. Cha-Cha, who was beside Xiao Xian, did not pay much attention to Mu Yao and the rest. It looked up instead. Since Cha-Cha had been to Eagle Mountain twice in a row, there was no need for him to go there again. But that didn't stop him from looking forward to it. When he sensed what was about to happen, he was so excited that he wanted to howl. The yang guang in the sky was actually very strong. If they weren't here, yang guang could be felt from somewhere else in the forest. Even though the mountain was covered by clouds, there was still light shining through them. It was as if the sun could be seen through the thick clouds. Gongjia, you noticed that the star butterfly larvae had changed too. He couldn't see them clearly because they were too far away, but he kept his eyes on the fat worm behind the swarm. Otherwise he wouldn't have noticed the white worms in the snow. At that moment the star butterfly worms stopped climbing. They were changing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Their bodies shrank and flattened. The white worms in the snow gradually merged with the snow. They looked like a mass of snow that was similar to the snow around them. Below a protruding rock on the mountain wall, a star butterfly worm clung to it like a ball of snow. If one didn't consider the logic behind why there would be snow under the rock, the transformation was shocking. This was the natural instinct of the star butterfly worm. Just like how creatures in the forest would disguise themselves when faced with a threat, these star butterfly worms were the same. They sensed danger. Even Gong Jiayu, who didn't know much about insects, felt chills run down his spine. The fear of uncertainty was enough to push his heart into his throat. It was dead silent. The entire mountain range seemed to have fallen into silence. Everyone's breathing became cautious, only the sound of the wind whistling in their ears. Suddenly, the clouds above began to swirl as if something was blowing them. Screech! The cry of an eagle that seemed to come from beyond the heavens rang out from above. Then, more eagle cries rang out as if they were very far away, but also as if they would arrive in the next moment. It was a giant eagle's cheer. The clouds above rolled even more violently, as if there were strong gusts of wind blowing from above, spreading to the surroundings, trying to blow away the thick clouds that were blocking their line of sight. Screech! Screech! The eagles' cries were getting closer, right above their heads. Mu Yao and the rest had been staring up nervously, their eyes wide and mouths agape. They were shocked by what they saw but did not dare to make a sound. Above their heads, in the thick layer of clouds, which was brightly illuminated by the sun, there were large swathes of shadows moving. The airflow from above finally blew away part of the clouds. The sunlight released the golden light that had been brewing for a long time, like sharp swords that broke through the clouds and were thrown into places that had been blocked by the clouds for a long time, opening up a brighter world. But soon the light was blocked again. This time, it was not the thick clouds that blocked Yang Guang's view, but several large figures. Unlike the old eagle Mu Yao had seen earlier, these figures were like newly awakened predators, eager to set the bloody rules of the hunt. Mu Yao thought the eagle he saw earlier was already a giant eagle, but now, he finally understood what Xiao Xian meant when he said giant in giant eagle. The eagle from before, even if placed in the group of eagles above, was only an ordinary one. Giant beast. Real giant beast. According to legends, giant beasts ruled the world in an even more distant era. But for some reason, the giant beasts that once ruled the world and pushed humans to the bottom of the food chain disappeared one by one. Only then did the humans who lived in the dark usher in a new era. Disregarding its strength, just its body size alone was enough to make it a true giant beast. In the past, he had thought that the ferocious beasts he had seen in the forest were already large in size. However, compared to what he was seeing now, they were not even worth mentioning. This was the first time he saw a true giant beast, and a group at that. They seemed to be mocking Mu Yao for his short-sightedness. The huge figures easily stirred the clouds with their powerful wings. They soared in the sky as if they were born in the clouds. Looking down on everything. Looking down on everything. That was the source of all the fear in Mu Yao's heart. What did the tribesmen say? This was the giant eagle's land of faith? What else did he say? You shouldn't be wary of me? Mu Yao's heart skipped a beat. He only had one thought: don't let the giant eagles discover them. Just as he thought this, Mu Yao heard something whirring in the air. Several figures flew in from above, drawing an arc in the air before crashing into the mountain wall where Mu Yao and the others were resting, exploding. The rocks on the mountain wall didn't crack, nor did Mu Yao and the others suffer much damage. Just some noise. Bang 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 bang. Clap clap. Thud. Each thud was louder than the last. Mu Yao. He wanted to curse the Yanjiao ancestors. When he looked up again, he saw a much smaller eagle flying out of the clouds that had yet to completely disperse. It swept its gaze across the mountain wall and flew towards the source of the sound. Soon after, more and more eagles broke through the clouds, which had dissipated a lot, and flew over. The younger giant eagles were more curious. They were so excited that they had nowhere to vent their energy. When they heard the sound below, they followed the sound. Behind the small eagles, there were a few eagles that were slightly larger than them. Then, a few eagles with a strong herd mentality also came down. Treacherous, cunning, shameless. Mu Yao cursed. Xiao Xian was the one who threw the things that made the noise. If they weren't running for their lives, Mu Yao would have cursed even more. Facing the incoming eagles, Mu Yao and the others drew their swords. The sharp blades clashed against the eagles' claws. Just as Mu Yao had expected, these eagles were different from the ones he'd met before. Their claws seemed to be covered in a layer of hard armor. Even if they hit, they couldn't easily cut off a toe. Plus, Mu Yao and the others didn't have any divine weapons. The situation was even more disadvantageous for them. Seeing that they were using weapons, the eagles became even more ferocious. They weaved through the air, using their sharp beaks and claws to attack those with weapons. Some people were directly taken away by the giant eagles, eaten or thrown down from the sky. Whether they could survive or not depended on their luck. Xiao Xian quietly watched as the people fled in panic after being attacked by the giant eagle. Treacherous, cunning, shameless? Why didn't the royal city say that when they attacked Yanjiao? Xiao Xian had no intention of attacking for now. Not all eagles were like the Cha-Cha or the Hui tribe's eagles. Some hated humans too. Xiao Xian didn't want to attract attention now. That was why he didn't go out even when he saw people escaping the eagles' attacks. Instead, he hid behind a rock and watched. Below, at the foot of the mountain. This is where the eagles are, Yizong said, looking up. The tribesmen are taking revenge. Ichi stared at the sky. He couldn't see clearly because of the distance, and divination didn't work here, but he could guess what was happening. Those giant eagles were too conspicuous, and they made the humans look small and insignificant. Then you have to be careful. You were at the front of the team that chased after the flaming horns. Tribesmen are vengeful. Mu Yao and the others couldn't avoid it, so you can't either, Ichi said expressionlessly. He didn't gloat or worry over this, it was as if he was just chatting. Compared to what he cared about, none of this was important. Yizong smiled bitterly. What's coming will come, no one can avoid it. This sentence seemed to be referring to the current situation, but it also seemed to be a metaphor for something else. After Ichi heard it, he did not refute but only sighed heavily. He wanted to lament, wanted to curse, but did not know what to say. But soon, his conflicted eyes became firm, and he sighed softly in agreement. Indeed, what should come, even if it is late for so many years, will still come. No one can avoid it. If it is not us, it will be our descendants. Why don't we bear it? As he spoke, there was the sound of rocks sliding down the cliff. A figure rolled down the cliff and landed on the ground. He didn't even have time to check his injuries before he scrambled to his feet and ran away from the foot of the mountain. Retreat. He still remembered the eagle whose 2 toes he had cut off. To be on the safe side, he decided to leave first. There were too many giant eagles here. What would he do if the eagle who had a grudge against him came with reinforcements? Wait for death? As long as he knew this was the larvae's nest, even if he failed this time, he could come back next time. As long as he was alive, there was a chance he could come again. Xiao Xian did not tell Mu Yao that although this was a place of worship for the giant eagles, it was not their nests. The eagles that entered Eagle Mountain had to wait a long time before coming out. Some eagles did not even come out after entering. When Mu Yao passed by Ichi and Yizong, he saw that they didn't intend to move. He shouted, "Are you stupid? Why aren't you running? You guys go ahead. We're not leaving," Yizong said. Mu Yao stopped, looking at Yizong in disbelief. "What did you say?" "We're staying here for now," Yizong said calmly. Mu Yao wanted to pull his ears and tell himself he'd misheard. He wanted to pry open Yizong's head and see if it was filled with bird shit. He looked at Yizong. "You're not leaving too?" Yizong had said, "We." Yi Chi didn't want to waste time. He flung his sleeves and walked back to where he'd been sitting. Mu Yao was so angry he wanted to kill them. The Yi family was crazy. So what if they didn't leave? He didn't want to die here with them. Retreat. Mu Yao shouted and fled with those who could still run. There were close to 500 of them when they arrived, but not even a tenth of them left. Some of them were those who had stayed at the foot of the mountain. Almost everyone who followed Mu Yao up the mountain was wiped out. Mu Yao was almost taken away by a giant eagle, but in the nick of time, he threw Gong Jiayu out to block the claw for him. At that moment, the master and his weapon were no longer important. Nothing was more important than his own life. In the sky there were many eagles circling, searching for humans. Yizong and Yi Chi watched from the forest, relieved that the eagles didn't like to eat on the ground. Even if they did, they would bring their prey to higher ground. Yizong and Yi Chi's slaves paled when they heard the screams. Their muscles tensed, the slightest movement in the leaves made their hair stand on end. In contrast, Yizong and Yi Chi were calm, as if they did not hear the thuds of the people thrown by the eagle. They did not hear the screams and cries for help. They stared intently at their trays as if nothing could distract them. Everything around them calmed down, the eagle's cries grew distant, and the people's cries stopped. Rustle, rustle, rustle. The sound of rustling grass followed by footsteps approached. Yizong and Yi Chi, who had been staring at the plates, moved their attention away from the plates and looked at the newcomer. Their eyes swept over the other party's animal hide armor and oddly colored broadsword. Xiao Xian of Yanjiao? The blade flashed with a cold light as if it carried the cold breath of metal. Yizong and Yi Chi's slaves tensed up and guarded them. They watched vigilantly as Xiao Xian walked towards them. You were among the people who hunted down the Yanjiao migration team, right? Xiao Xian looked at Yizong. Although his tone was a question, there was certainty in it. Yizong took a deep breath and pushed aside the two slaves in front of him. Give me 3 days. After 3 days you can do whatever you want with me. Chapter 788. 3 days? Xiao Xian didn't know why they didn't leave with Mu Yao, nor did he know why Yizong said 3 days, but why? Xiao Xian looked at the two Yi family members not far away. In the forest, wolves don't give giant antlered deer any time to catch their breath. No, these 3 days are for us in Yanjiao. Yizong's expression didn't change. In 3 days the Yi family will fight to the death with Yixiang. I don't think I need to explain who Yixiang is. Xiao Xian raised an eyebrow. Of course he knew who Yixiang was. Rock Hill City was where it was today mainly because of Yixiang. And Yixiang had always been called bad luck by the Yi family. Xiao Xian pointed at Yizong and Yizong with his free hand. You. Then he pointed to the ground. Here. He pointed in the direction of the desert. Fight Yixiang? How were they going to fight from so far away? Also, Yizong had said the Yi family, not us, or me. Did that mean the entire Yi family was going to fight? They were so far away the Yi family wouldn't all head to the desert. How were they going to fight? Seeing Xiao Xian's confusion, Yizong explained slowly, as if he was sure that Xiao Xian wouldn't kill them now. The Yi family's way of fighting is different from other tribes. Yi Chi lifted his chin slightly at Yizong's words, his face filled with obvious arrogance. He seemed to despise the way other tribes fought. Fighting with blades at the slightest disagreement was barbaric. How vulgar. How could they compare to the Yi family? How different. Xiao Xian's interest was piqued. The Yi family had always been a special group. They didn't have much fighting ability, nor were they as strong as other tribes. However, they were one of the 6 noble families in the royal city. If I tell you, will you give us 3 days? Yizong asked. Sure. Xiao Xian could afford to wait for 3 days. Yizong was relieved to hear Xiao Xian agree. As long as Xiao Xian agreed, 3 days would be enough. Sitting back down on the animal hide cushion the slaves had laid out, Yizong said, the Yi family have never believed in pure physical strength. Xiao Xian knew that the Yi family could kill people without leaving a trace. They could even create all sorts of accidents without anyone knowing why. The abilities of the Yi family's ancestors were not limited to the world you can see. Yizong looked into the sky with admiration and respect. You will not be able to see the duels between the Yi family members. Distance is not an obstacle for the truly powerful, just like how you can see what is happening in faraway places. Can't see? Xiao Xian had wanted to watch the duel between the Yi family members and see if he could learn more from it so that he could improve his not divination skills. However, Yizong said that he wouldn't be able to see it. I don't know how you know the Yi family's divination skills, but you are not a member of the E family. Even if you can grasp part of the divination skills, you won't be able to access the core knowledge. That knowledge can only be accessed through the inheritance of the E family. Also, it is related to the power of the fire seed, Yizong said. Kid, what kind of divination skills are you using from the E family? Ichi couldn't help but ask. He still couldn't believe that the person who had been using divination skills to track them was really this tribesman. If I tell you, will you tell me how to watch the duel? Xiaoxian asked. You can't. If you want to see what normal people can't, you must know the core knowledge that Yizong mentioned. You can't do that. Even if someone tells you how to do it, you won't be able to do it. Because you don't have the blood of the E family in you. Ichi said with certainty. Without the blood of the E family, he wouldn't be able to use the power of the fire seed in his bloodline. He wouldn't be able to access the core knowledge, let alone watch the duel between the E family and the E family on another level. The fire seed again? Then how do you know the E family is going to fight? Did you get the information from divination? 3 days? Because the duel will start in 3 days? Xiaoxian asked. These people had been in the forest for so long. How did they get such accurate information? That's right. Yizong nodded. Although Xiaoxian had done divination before, he didn't know what the E family was up to. Maybe this was the difference between the E family and the E family? Besides, other than knots, Xiaoxian didn't know anything about the E family. You should be able to feel that there's a force here that's affecting our divination. We can't divine anything else, but we can divine anything about the E family. There will definitely be a duel in 3 days. Yizong said. Something was affecting the divination? Xiaoxian hadn't noticed anything. He had just done a divination on the hunting team. Although there were some obstacles, they could still continue. Of course, Xiaoxian didn't mention any of this. In 3 days, Yizong only briefly told Xiaoxian about Yixiang and the upcoming duel with the Yi family. After that, he and Yi Qi focused on preparing for the duel. This was a good place. Perhaps because it was close to Eagle Mountain, there weren't any threatening fearsome beasts nearby. The eagles rarely rested at the foot of the mountain. No wonder Yizong and Yi Qi didn't leave with Mu Yao and the others. Even if they had 3 days, they wouldn't be able to leave this forest. They didn't know if they could find a better place. That was why they decided to stay here and prepare for the duel. The war had come so suddenly that they had not expected it either. They had originally planned to search for better forging materials with the Mu family to deal with the trouble in the desert, but they had not expected the war to suddenly draw closer. They no longer needed to catch the star butterfly insects because there was no longer a need. Even if they could catch them and forge better weapons, the war would have already ended by then. Yizong and Yi Qi had said 3 days. But on the second day their expressions changed drastically. They ordered their slaves to guard the area while they took out the tray, jade stones and golden sand they had prepared. Just like a divination, they placed the jade stones on the tray according to a certain pattern. Then they sprinkled the fine golden sand on the tray. Every time their fingers moved the jade stones, the sand would change. Xiaoxian looked over. Yizong and Yi Qi ignored everything around them, their eyes fixed on the changes in the jade stones and sand. It was as if the tray was everything. They weren't afraid that Xiaoxian would see this. In their hearts, Xiaoxian wasn't a member of the Yi family. Even if he saw what they were doing, even if he was gifted and could understand some of the mysteries, he wouldn't be able to touch the unseen plane of the world. Seeing what others couldn't see had always been the reason why the Yi family thought they were better than others. In the square plate, the golden sand moved on its own despite the absence of wind. One moment it was moving in this direction and the next moment, it changed directions. The jade stone seemed to have created an invisible force to move the fine sand. The hand that moved the jade stone seemed to be moving very slowly because every time he blinked he seemed to see a hand stop there, not moving at all but also seemed to be moving very fast. Around the hand were shadows, and the jade stone and the golden sand were moving. Something was fermenting rapidly. The waves of energy became faster and faster. Yizong and the slaves around Yi Qi couldn't help but take a step back. Then another step, then another step. They moved even further away from the two. The sudden increase in energy around the two gave them a lot of pressure. Whoosh, an orange-red flame mixed with white light suddenly appeared. It drew an arc in the ground in front of Yi Qi, forming an arc of fire. On the outer side of the arc of fire, there was a ball of fire. The top of the flame was mostly orange-red, while the bottom was white. The flame was almost as tall as a person. On the other side of the arc of fire, Yi Qi sat there. Behind him there were 3 shadows. They seemed to be illuminated by the flame, flickering along with the dancing flames on the other side of the arc of fire. The ball of fire actually illuminated 3 shadows. The flame of the fire seed. The ball of fire that appeared was the flame of the fire seed that merged with the E family's bodies. The flame that appeared, the arc of fire drawn by the flames on the ground, and the 3 shadows, formed the shape of the E family's totem. This was the E family's totem, which used to be the E tribe's totem. Xiao Xian had seen the E family's totem in many places in the royal city. The aristocrats in the royal city no longer called it a totem, but a clan emblem. Carriages, shops, and mansions all had such a totem. But Xiao Xian never knew that the E family's totem would appear in this form. Yizong was 1 step slower, but the same thing happened to him. Xiao Xian finally understood what they meant when they said they had 3 days. The battle was bound to happen within 3 days, and as long as the 2 members of the E family were in this state, Xiao Xian wouldn't be able to make a move easily. This was because the power of the fire seed was very effective in protecting the 2 of them, just like how the fire pit protected the tribe in the past. The power of the fire seed was a form of protection, and the E family was able to maximize the power of this protection. It was much stronger than what Xiao Xian felt from the Yanjiao people. It was fine when they were far away, but as soon as they were within 10 steps of them, they would feel a strong repulsive force with every step. This was why the slaves around the 2 of them kept retreating, because they couldn't stand close to the 2 of them at all. Moreover, Yizong and Yi Qi were sitting very close to each other. The power of the fire seed had a superimposed effect, so the repulsive force towards those who weren't from the E family was even stronger. The battle with the E family definitely wouldn't last for just 1 or 2 days. The 2 of them had said they would have 3 days, probably because they wanted to stall for time. They didn't want to waste their power before the battle started, so they had to deal with Xiao Xian first. Once they were fully prepared for battle, the protective shield of the fire seed would be activated. You think I can't make a move just because you're borrowing the power of the fire seed? Xiao Xian laughed. Yizong and Yi Qi probably expected that he wouldn't make a move at a time like this. The battle between the Yi family and Yi Xiang was actually a good thing for the Yanjiao tribe. After all, the Yanjiao didn't like either side. Moreover, Yizong might have analyzed Xiao Xian's style of doing things in all kinds of situations, so he felt that it was more likely that Xiao Xian wouldn't make a move. That was why he was so calm. However, Yizong definitely didn't expect that Xiao Xian wasn't afraid of the repulsive force of the fire seed at all. He could also withstand the pressure from the 2 of them, but Xiao Xian didn't plan on killing them right now. Xiao Xian looked at Yizong and Yi Qi, who were surrounded by totemic flames. He found another spot and told Cha-Cha to keep an eye on the surroundings while he took out a straw rope. Couldn't watch the battle with the E family? How would he know if he didn't try? Chapter 789. Xiao Xian had seen Yi Qi and Yizong's movements from beginning to end. After sitting down, Xiao Xian thought about it carefully. In fact, divination was similar to witchcraft incantations in many aspects. For example, knot divination. Every knot and even every detail of the knot was like an incantation in witchcraft incantations. However, not everyone could do that because witchcraft incantations, knot divination, and other divination methods required energy that was different from totem power to activate. Totemic power was a type of fire seed energy, but the fire seed's power was not limited to totems. There were other types of power, such as the power of inheritance. Witchcraft incantations were activated by a special power of inheritance. Similarly, divination relied on a special power as well. The E family used a power unique to the E family. It was a type of power from the E family's fire seed. Xiao Xian, on the other hand, used a different type of power from his body. It had nothing to do with the Yanjiao's fire seed. This special power allowed Xiao Xian to ignore the rejection of other tribes' fire seeds. It allowed him to do things that normal people could not. For example, he could perform the E family's knot divination. He could also turn water moonstones into water moonstones like the drumming tribe. All these things showed how special Xiao Xian's power was. Now Xiao Xian wanted to try again. He wanted to see if he could enter the E family's realm that normal people could not see. He was very interested in the E family's war. First, he was curious about how the E family would wage war. Second, he was curious about the appearance of that person in the desert. Until now, Xiao Xian had never seen one of the legendary founders of Rock Hill City. The man the Yi family regarded as ominous. No matter how old Yi Xiang was 1,000 years ago, 1,000 years had passed. Even the founder of Rock Hill City, Mu Han, had passed away. The people the Yi family had forced Yi Xiang to leave were also long gone. However, this person was still alive. He had tortured so many people in the Yi family to death. Now he was finally going to attack the Yi family in the royal city. Even if their ancestors were gone, they still had descendants. Revenge was a dish best served cold. EC had once told Xiao Xian that if this ominous really did attack the Yi family, he would do so with the intention of exterminating the entire family. There would be no mercy. Xiao Xian wanted to see just how powerful the legendary ominous of the Yi family was. Unfortunately, the Yi family's war was not something that normal people could see. Discarding all distracting thoughts, Xiao Xian held a straw rope in his hand and replayed Yi Zong and Yi Qi's actions in his mind. Time after time, the memory deepened in his mind. As he repeated everything over and over again, to the point where every detail, every finger movement, and every grain of sand became clear to him, a pair of hands appeared in Xiao Xian's mindscape. When Xiao Xian received the legacy of not divination from the Bansui leaf, he had learned how to use a straw rope to make a divination conclusion from this pair of hands. Right now the pair of hands were holding a rope. As Xiao Xian repeated Yi Qi's actions in his mind, the pair of hands holding the straw rope in his mindscape moved as well. The rope twined rapidly between the fingers of the pair of hands. Xiao Xian stared intently at the pair of hands. The knotting process was too complicated. Xiao Xian could not keep up with the speed of the pair of hands. Therefore Xiao Xian stopped what he was doing and memorized every detail of the knotting process. The knots were much more complicated than the ones Xiao Xian usually made for divination. However, because the pair of hands were so fast, it only took them a breath to complete the knot. As the pair of hands finished making the knot, a spell symbol that looked like a burning flame appeared in Xiao Xian's mindscape. The flame on the spell symbol was white at the bottom and orange-red at the top, just like the color of the Yi family's fire seed. When the pair of hands disappeared in his mindscape, the burning spell symbol disappeared as well. Xiao Xian carefully recalled the knotting motions of the pair of hands. His fingers, which were holding the straw rope, started moving as he recalled the knotting motions of the pair of hands. Although he did not know which member of the Yi family had created this legacy of not divination, he had to admit that it was really impressive. His hands were like a translation machine, presenting the technique formed by the jade, the golden sand, and the square plate in the form of knots. As Xiao Xian recalled the movements of the pair of hands in his mind, he slowed down and broke them down bit by bit as he tried to make a knot. The straw rope in his hands also started to be knotted according to the movements of his fingers. However, compared to the knotting speed of the pair of hands in his mindscape, Xiao Xian's knotting speed was much slower. Wrong. A slight mistake caused the knot to fail. The straw rope wrapped around Xiao Xian's hands. It had been a long time since he had last seen this situation. It wasn't that the divination couldn't work, it was that there was a mistake. Thinking back to when he first practiced knotting knots, he often encountered similar situations. He broke the tangled straw rope in his hands and took out a new straw rope to practice. He recalled every detail of the pair of hands and followed suit. Still wrong. If he was not careful, he would make another mistake. As long as he made a single mistake, the knot would not be able to be tied. Again. He kept recalling Yi Zong's and Yi Qi's movements. Then he observed the pair of hands knotting motions. Then he slowed down the knotting speed and followed suit. Wrong again. Wrong again. Yes, this is it. Xiao Xian raised his eyebrows slightly. When the last step was completed, he felt a boom in his brain. It was as if there was a cold current that came out of nowhere, stimulating the nerves in his brain to the point where they seemed to be buzzing. He opened his eyes and looked at the straw rope in his hands. A strange knot had appeared there. Xiao Xian could even vaguely feel the subtle changes in his surroundings when the knot appeared. It was as if the air had silently fluctuated. Bang! With a soft sound, the straw rope in Xiao Xian's hands broke into pieces. The knotted part of the rope turned into bits of grass. His head was throbbing with pain. He had used too much energy when he was tying the rope just now. It would take a while for him to recover. Xiao Xian stared at the broken straw rope in his hands. He didn't know if it was because of the sudden break in the knot, but after the knot was formed, it suddenly fell apart. Fortunately, he had brought more straw rope with him before he came. Because he might need to use straw rope for divination, Xiao Xian usually used a different method when he was making straw ropes before a hunt. Every straw rope used for hunting could be divided into more than 10 strands of thin rope. This method was more complicated and took more time, but the straw rope made with this method was stronger. Could also be used for divination. Tracking didn't use a lot of straw rope, but now Xiao Xian wanted to try to enter the other plane that the Yi family had mentioned. This would require a lot of straw rope. After recalling the knotting method from earlier, Xiao Xian repeated the knotting action. Success the first time could only be attributed to luck and accident. Only by succeeding every time could one be considered to have mastered the knotting method. There was no room for luck when it came to matters like this. If he couldn't master it now, he might not be able to find the feeling of tying the rope again after some time. He might even miss out on a lot of important insights. The knot that he successfully tied was deeply engraved in Xiao Xian's mind. When he succeeded the second time, Xiao Xian's hand movements were still not fast, but they were much smoother. Then the third time, the fourth time, after successfully tying 5 knots in a row, Xiao Xian temporarily stopped practicing the first knot and moved on to the next one. When all the movements of his hands were put together, he didn't just make one knot. This kind of knot was very draining. Xiao Xian rested for a while before starting a new knot. The second knot was even more complicated and difficult. When Xiao Xian succeeded in tying the knot, he couldn't wait to leave the sea of consciousness. His vision went dark for a moment. The long-awaited feeling of exhaustion reminded Xiao Xian of the first time he practiced knot divination. After resting for a while and drinking some water, he felt much better. It really wasn't easy to watch a battle between the Yi family. If he hadn't tried, he wouldn't have known that the Yi family could withstand such a huge expenditure of energy. Previously, Yi Qi and Yi Zong had done it all in one step. The series of movements seemed to be a whole, without any stagnation or disintegration. That's really not easy. No wonder they're one of the 6 major aristocratic families in the royal city. In the past, the Yi family, which was the early Yi tribe, was also a major tribe. Every major tribe had its reasons for being so powerful. Taking a deep breath, Xiao Xian felt his fatigue recede. He continued trying to tie the third knot. In the sea of consciousness, the hands made a total of 8 knots. In other words, not only did Xiao Xian have to successfully tie all 8 knots, but he also had to tie all 8 knots consecutively. There couldn't be too long of a break in between, or the knots would directly break. This is a difficult task. Was Xiao Xian anxious? Of course he was. If he could learn how to tie all 8 knots smoothly, even if he could see the layer that ordinary people couldn't see, the battle might have already ended. However, there was no point in being anxious. The more anxious he was, the more likely he would make mistakes. He had to remain calm. 8 knots, each more complicated than the last. The easiest one was the first knot. The more he tried, the more difficult it became. The number of failures increased. Fortunately, Xiao Xian had some experience with the first few knots. These knots were different from the knots he usually tied during his divination. He couldn't use his past experience to look at these knots. While the feeling was good, try again. 3rd knot, 4th knot, 5th knot. When the 8th knot was finally completed, it had been 2 days since Xiao Xian started trying to tie the rope. 2 days, 8 knots, and this was after Xiao Xian sacrificed his sleep. He felt as if he had gone through a famine. His entire body was weak and his back was covered in sweat. Large droplets of sweat dripped down from his forehead. Heaving a long sigh, he casually ate some of the dry rations he had brought with him. He went out to hunt. After eating and drinking to his heart's content, Xiao Xian felt as if he had been reborn. He glanced at Yi Zong and Yi Qi. 8 slaves were guarding the 2 of them. However, Yi Zong and Yi Qi were still the same as they were the day before yesterday. They were like stone statues, untouched. Chapter 790. After successfully tying all 8 knots, Xiao Xian practiced a few more times before combining the knots together. While Xiao Xian was practicing his knots at the foot of the mountain range next to Eagle Mountain, a solemn atmosphere filled the air at the Yi family's residence in the royal city on the other side of the sea. After so many years of development, the Yi family had split into many branches. The main branch was the Yi family's main branch, which was the branch that held the most power. At this time, almost all the members of the main branch of the Yi family were in seclusion. In the royal city, there were usually a few high-profile people who made their presence known. But now, not a single member of the main branch of the Yi family was hanging around outside. There were many people standing around the walls of the Yi family's residence. They were all slaves and members of the main branch of the Yi family. Other than them, no one else could even dream of getting close. Since 3 days ago, the street in the royal city that was used for fortune-telling had become empty. Many caravans and trading teams who were unaware of the situation had come here to try to divine their fortunes or predict other things. But to their surprise, they found nothing. They didn't dare to go directly to the Yi family to look for them. Anyone with half a brain could tell that something was wrong. Even if they were curious, they could only watch the Yi family's residence from afar. In fact, it wasn't just the caravans and trading teams who had traveled all the way to the royal city. Even some of the Yi family's youths, who were unaware of the situation, looked around curiously from time to time after they were assigned tasks. The members of the main branch of the E family rarely came to the main branch of the E family. But this time, all the members of the E family were on the move. Father, why does everyone look so nervous? What are those people from the main branch trying to do? I heard that they are going to fight someone? Who are they going to fight with? A youth from the main branch of the E family asked his father. If it was in the past, when his father heard someone mention the people from the main branch, he would definitely say some sarcastic words. The people from the main branch usually ordered the people from the side branches around and did not have a good attitude. It was just that they did not dare to vent their accumulated resentment, so they only talked about it in private. But at this time the boy's father frowned, his eyes filled with worry. Hearing his son's question, he looked up and said sternly in a low voice, "Shut up. Keep an eye on the surroundings. Kill whoever dares to barge in at this time." Hearing his father's attitude, the youth nervously swallowed his saliva. He knew that this time was different from the past and the situation was likely quite serious. But since his father didn't want to say more to him, he didn't dare to ask. Looking around, he whispered, "Yes." Then he closed his mouth tightly and didn't make another sound. Nearly 100 people were gathered in a large courtyard in the center of the E family. They were all members of the main bloodline, and they were all rather powerful members of the main bloodline. 1/3 of them were known as masters in the royal city. No matter how arrogant they usually were or how pretentious they were outside, here they were all obedient students sitting in their seats obediently. Whether it was the people sitting on the cushions in the center of the courtyard or the people from the other main bloodlines standing around, they all waited in silence. It was this kind of waiting that made the atmosphere more solemn. This kind of suffocating pressure could be felt even by the people outside the E family. The sky also became gloomier than before. Suddenly the sound of footsteps came from afar. They were fast, but they didn't sound rushed or anxious. As soon as they heard the footsteps, the people in the courtyard who were still in a daze immediately calmed down. There were 8 people in total. The 3 people standing at the front were all white-haired old men. These were the elders of the E family who usually didn't care about worldly affairs. They were the truly senior and powerful elders of the E family, and they would only appear when it was truly a matter of life and death. Behind the 3 elders was the head of the E family. In the eyes of the tribesmen, he was the leader of the family. This kind of person usually had the final say in the E family. Not many people dared to talk back to him. But now he was only the 4th in line. The 3 elders in front of him were his great-grandmother, and the other 2 were also very senior. When one of the elders called him, he bowed slightly and respectfully walked over to listen. "Not everyone is here yet?" asked an elder with cloudy white eyes without looking at the courtyard. Although he couldn't see, it didn't affect his perception of the outside world. Sometimes he could even see more than the average person. "Most of them are here. Only a few who were out on missions couldn't make it back in time. Yi Zong and Yi Qi are still on another continent, but they should be ready by now," replied the head of the Yi family. The elder wasn't angry because of this. After all, those who were out on missions could still participate in the battle. "Let's do the divination," said the white-haired old woman standing next to the head of the E family. The other 2 elders nodded. The head of the E family said loudly, "Let's do the divination." This was something the E family did every time there was a major event. The so-called divination was to take out the precious item left behind by their ancestors. It was a tortoise shell. The tortoise shell was engraved with orange-red words and lines. The words weren't common words, but runes that only the E family could understand. The lines vaguely formed the totem of the E family. On the other hand, the tortoiseshell was completely white without any patterns or engravings. Inside the tortoiseshell, in the space between the tortoiseshell and the tortoiseshell, there were a total of 8 polished bones of different shapes. "Who's going to do the divination this time?" asked an elder. The white-haired old woman twirled the walking stick in her hand. "I did the divination for the last family meeting. This time it's Yituan's turn." The cloud-eyed elder didn't say anything. He walked forward and lifted the tortoiseshell with both hands, then returned to his seat. The 3 mats at the front of the courtyard were for the 3 of them. After sitting down, Yituan placed his right hand on the tortoiseshell's back. The tortoiseshell was bigger than his palm. Normally he wouldn't have been able to grab it. But now the tortoiseshell seemed to be glued to Yituan's palm. Yituan shook his wrist. The bones in the tortoiseshell jumped with a clatter. When he raised his hand, the tortoiseshell didn't fall down. The bones didn't fall through the cracks either. Instead, they continued to jump inside the tortoiseshell. Flames appeared. An arc of fire appeared in front of Yituan. Crimson and white flames rose on the other side of the arc. 3 long shadows appeared behind Yituan. Tuan reached his tortoiseshell hand towards the fire. As the tortoiseshell approached the fire, the bones in the tortoiseshell jumped even more violently, making more urgent sounds. Crack, crack, crack. The cracking sound drowned out the bones in the tortoiseshell. Orange-red cracks appeared on the tortoiseshell's belly. When the cracking stopped, Tuan retracted his hand and looked at the cracks. He had lost his eyesight, but that didn't stop him from seeing the cracks. The more he looked, the more serious his expression became, the more worried his eyes grew. Tuan passed the tortoiseshell to the other two elders. Their expressions weren't much better than Tuan's. "Looks like the family is in for a tough battle," said Tuan. In fact, the results of the cracks were worse than what Tuan had said. It wasn't a tough battle, it was a battle to the death. But there was a chance of survival and death. But that chance was full of variables. The three elders knew this. But they couldn't say the results of the tortoiseshell now. They didn't want to waver before the battle. Sighing almost imperceptibly, Tuan said loudly, "Prepare for battle." A powerful ripple of power swept across the spacious courtyard like a sudden wave. The people around the courtyard didn't dare to breathe loudly. The orange-red gaseous flames that could be seen with the naked eye filled the surroundings and rolled around. Everything that the naked eye could see seemed to be distorted. Whoosh! Inside the tortoise shell, the sound of the bone pieces hitting the tortoise shell was hurried. The courtyard seemed to have blocked out all sounds. The sound of insects, the sound of leaves, the sound of people breathing, everything disappeared. The clattering of the bone pieces became the only sound in the courtyard. Whoosh! The clattering grew more urgent until it suddenly stopped. Open! It was as if an ancient beast had opened its black maw where Tuan was, swallowing everything in the courtyard. The surrounding buildings, people, flowers, and trees all disappeared, leaving only emptiness. Of course, this was only seen by the 100 or so people sitting in the courtyard. As for the people standing at the edge of the courtyard, other than a large totem in the courtyard and the powerful aura fluctuations brought about by the crimson flame, there were no other major changes. In the emptiness, everyone's figures blurred. They could only vaguely make out a human figure glowing in flames. Even their silhouettes blurred occasionally, their faces indistinguishable. Tuan could sense that the person they were waiting for was about to appear. The person who had been predicted to bring misfortune to the family 1,000 years ago would soon appear before them. Soon, several figures appeared in the emptiness not far from them. They were members of the family who couldn't make it back in time. Another figure appeared with the appearance of the family's totem. Ichi Izong? The family recognized them. Even though they couldn't see their faces, they recognized their auras. The family didn't ask Ichi or Izong about the situation. Nothing mattered now except the impending battle. Why waste time asking about unimportant things? After gathering, the three elders of the family allowed everyone to get used to the new environment. Some newcomers would feel uncomfortable, so they came early. After a while, Tuan's eyebrows twitched as he looked into the emptiness. Tuan wasn't the only one. The other two elders also looked over warily. Everyone else behind them paused. Did someone else come from there? The family head was also racking his brains. He could not think of anyone who had not appeared here while on a mission. Even if there was, they would have appeared a little late. Based on the time, it should have been a few days ago. The family wouldn't make such a mistake. Excluding all these, could it be that the person who appeared now was their enemy this time? Knots. Tuan couldn't hide his surprise. With their abilities, they could tell how anyone who wasn't in the family's headquarters got in. The ripples weren't the family's usual method but the long-lost knots. He wasn't familiar with knot divination and only knew a little about it. He could guess what method was used based on the ripples. Knots. The rest of the family were equally shocked. Didn't the family's knots branch disappear a long time ago? Why would they appear here now? No, there was someone else. Xiang knew knots too. This meant that even if the person wasn't Xiang, he was very likely related to him. Knots were a type of grass. Together with armor and bone divination, grass was the family's three most powerful divination branches. Divination came from them. Rumor had it that the ancestors of the grass branch only needed to pluck a blade of grass from a mountain to know what they wanted to know. Unfortunately, time passed quickly and many years had passed. In the end, only the knotted rope school was left of the originally complicated grass school. The other schools had already evolved, more or less adding other materials to assist them. Some had even absorbed the elements of armor and bone reading to create other new methods. The knotted rope school was also regarded as the most conservative, stubborn, and unreasonable school. At the same time, it was also the poorest school. This was because the knotted rope school did not have the concept of money, nor did they pursue material pursuits. If someone they did not like offered a lot of money, they would not lend a helping hand. As a result, they were gradually pushed aside, becoming destitute and declining. The last master of knots died 1,000 years ago. What made the Yi family gnash their teeth was that the master had taken in a disciple before he died. The master only took in one disciple in his life, and that disciple was the thorn in the Yi family's throat, Yi Xiang. When Yi Xiang left, he took the master's knots legacy with him. Since then, the Yi family no longer practiced traditional knots. Knots disappeared, but it didn't affect the Yi family much. Later generations of the Yi family came up with even more powerful divination methods. The first thought that came to everyone's mind was, is there a traitor? Yi Zong, who were you with before you came? Yi Tuan suddenly asked. Yi Qi and Yi Zong were taken aback by Yi Tuan's question, not understanding why. Was Yi Tuan suspecting them? Suspecting them of betrayal? That wasn't right either. Yi Tuan's voice was stern, but it wasn't directed at them. This wasn't the tone of a traitor. Several people flashed through Yi Qi's mind, including Xiao Xian, but he firmly rejected them. It couldn't be that tribesman. Tribesmen couldn't possibly know about the Yi family's core. Yi Zong was also thinking. The first thing that came to mind was Yanjiao Xiao Xian, but he didn't believe it either, so he didn't know how to answer. Soon the ripples became more obvious. There were even flames, indicating that a figure was about to appear. However, unlike the Yi family, there was no Yi family totem. Before Yi Zong and Yi Qi appeared, there would be a Yi family totem formed from the fire seed's flames beneath their feet. What did it mean if there was no Yi family totem? They weren't even from the Yi family. Yi Xiang was also from the Yi family and had Yi family blood in him. This wouldn't happen. Then who was it? Yi Zong's guess suddenly became 80% likely. Xiao Xian? Is it Xiao Xian from the Yanjiao tribe? What? A tribesman? And a Yanjiao tribesman? Even the three leading figures were stunned. If one could see their expressions, they would be filled with shock and disbelief. If the speaker wasn't Yi Zong but someone else from the Yi family, they would have been scolded. However, Yi Zong was a genius of the younger generation. He wasn't one to spout nonsense or make random guesses. While the Yi family was still in shock and disbelief, the flames grew bigger and bigger. Unlike the Yi family's fire seed, the flames were crimson, but there was still no totem. The flames finally condensed into a blurry figure. It was much more blurry than anyone else in the Yi family. It looked like it could scatter at any moment. This aura. Yi Qi looked in that direction as if he had been struck by a bell. Yanjiao. Xiao Xian. Chapter 791. Xiao Xian felt his eyes burning, and it was difficult for him to even open them. It was as if someone was hammering his head with a hammer, causing him to feel a dull pain. His eardrums also hurt so badly that he even suspected that he had gone deaf. There was a cacophony of noises all around him. It sounded like the collective howling of wild beasts in the forest, but it also sounded like someone was making a racket. The cacophony was endless, but it didn't feel real. Even if he covered his ears, the cacophony wouldn't stop. Xiao Xian didn't know why it was like this. He was just practicing the 8 knots, and as he gradually became more familiar with them, he suddenly felt his surroundings change. The sudden change brought about a strong sense of discomfort, as if he was in a different world. Xiao Xian couldn't even sense Cha-Cha's aura. His eyes couldn't see what was going on around him, but after switching to his special vision, Xiao Xian could finally see things clearly. He could see some balls of light not far in front of him. No, they weren't balls of light, they were a group of people. To be precise, they were a group of human-shaped flames. They looked like human figures, and the color of the flames was a combination of orange, red, and white. It was the color of the Yi family's fire seed. Gradually, the discomfort in his body subsided, and the cacophony of noises in his ears faded until it disappeared. His surroundings were completely silent. Xiao Xian removed his hands from his ears and stood still. He looked at the balls of light over there. After switching to his normal vision, what he saw wasn't much different from what he saw with his special vision. His surroundings were still pitch black and he couldn't see the end of it. In the darkness, the gathering of the balls of light was the most obvious. Xiao Xian Yanjiao? A voice with obvious shock and astonishment sounded. It seemed that Xiao Xian's appearance was very unexpected and he couldn't believe it. Xiao Xian looked in that direction. As his body quickly adapted to this place, he could also sense the movements over there. He could also sense the aura of the speaker, and of course he could also hear the speaker's voice clearly. Yi Qi. Xiao Xian looked at a figure. He couldn't see the person's face, but he could tell from his voice and aura. Xiao Xian also recognized Yi Zong, who was standing beside Yi Qi. "It's really you. How did you get here?" Yi Qi still couldn't figure out how Xiao Xian had followed them here. Didn't he ask them to tell him the method? But at that time he and Yi Zong did not say anything, nor did they tell Xiao Xian how to enter this place. In fact, Xiao Xian was not even a member of the Yi family. Or could it be that Xiao Xian actually had Yi family blood in him? Yi Qi was not the only one with this thought. Even the 3 highest-ranking elders had their doubts for a moment. But the truth before their eyes told them that Xiao Xian did not have any Yi family aura, because Xiao Xian did not have any Yi family power. Even the color of his flames was different. Without Yi family blood, without Yi family power, how did this tribesman enter this place? They couldn't figure it out, This was completely impossible, but it really happened. It drove the Yi family crazy. "Where did you learn how to knot?" asked Yi Tuan. Xiao Xian looked at Yi Tuan and the other 2 figures beside him. Among the group, these 3 figures were the most solid and clear, unlike the others who would occasionally emit flames to ruin their silhouettes. "By chance," said Xiao Xian. In fact, Xiao Xian was also very curious. What kind of place was this? Although he was here, he knew nothing about this place. Moreover, Yi Zong and Yi Qi had left for several days. Xiao Xian had spent 2 to 3 days practicing all 8 knots, then another 2 to link them together. In total, it had been 4 to 5 days. But where was the legendary Yi Xiang? Wasn't there a battle? Why hadn't it started? "You're lying, you're definitely with Yi Xiang," someone from the Yi family said. However, Yi Tuan raised a hand and the commotion died down. "Why are you here?" asked Yi Tuan. As Yi Tuan spoke, Xiao Xian felt as if an invisible sword was pointed at him. If he was not careful, it would fall on him. "I've long heard that the Yi family is different from the rest. I was just curious and came here by accident. I was tying knots and came in." "Don't worry, I'm just here to take a look," said Xiao Xian. He suddenly thought of a problem. He could enter, but he did not know how to leave. Impulsive, Xiao Xian thought. Xiao Xian did not expect to enter this strange place so quickly. He had even thought of not being able to enter. After all, Yi Zong had said that without the Yi family's bloodline and fire seed, one could not enter. Whether he's telling the truth or not, "We cannot allow any uncontrollable accidents in this battle," said an elder. This meant that Xiao Xian, who had appeared here, would be chased out or killed. Logically speaking, they should have done so to remove any interference. However, Yi Tuan suddenly thought of the crack in the tortoise shell during the divination. Was the sliver of life and death also an accident? That accident, was it referring to this person who suddenly appeared in front of him? Yi Tuan also wanted to know why Xiao Xian was here. He did not connect Xiao Xian to Yi Xiang. Xiao Xian's current state and the way he covered his ears when he appeared were similar to the Yi family when they first came here. Other than the nodding method, Xiao Xian had nothing to do with Yi Xiang. The Yi family had a lot to think about. Sometimes, a seemingly small matter could affect the bigger picture. The more important the situation was, the more they had to think twice and act with caution. To many, the Yi family thought too much and were not decisive enough. Now Yi Tuan was faced with the same choice. Kill. Or not kill. He had many doubts, but soon Yi Tuan made his choice. Yi Xiang is coming. Ignore that tribesman for now. Since he did not know what to do with Xiao Xian, he would put him aside for now. If Xiao Xian did anything strange, he was confident that he could kill Xiao Xian. In this place they were much stronger than Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian looked like he was about to disappear at any moment. Another elder had a different opinion. They were not on good terms with the Yanjiao tribe and even had old grudges. However, he understood Yi Tuan's choice. It was better to pay more attention to Yi Xiang. At Yi Tuan's words, the others shifted their attention away from Xiao Xian and focused. Compared to Xiao Xian, who was obviously new here, this dangerous person was more worthy of their attention. If they could see their faces clearly, they would see unease and fear in some of their eyes. After all, this dangerous person was the Yi family's unlucky star, that even their ancestors could not defeat. Xiao Xian deliberately kept his distance from them. He just wanted to watch from the sidelines. Even if he wanted to take revenge on the Yi family, now was not the time. He did not have the right time, place or people. Although the situation here was different from what he expected, he had no plans to leave just yet. Since he was here, he might as well watch. He did not want to be affected, so he kept his distance to show that he was watching from the sidelines. No matter which side won this internal battle, the remaining side would still be at odds with the Yanjiao tribe. Xiao Xian could learn more about the people on both sides through the battlefield, which would help him in the future. especially Yi Xiang, who had to be carefully observed. This was why Xiao Xian was willing to risk entering this place. His understanding of Yi Xiang was limited to what he heard from others and the pitiful records left by his ancestors. On the mainland in the desert of Rock Hill City, a hooded figure slowly walked into the underground palace. Shi Shu respectfully followed behind and walked in together. There were no other Rock Hill City people in the underground palace, only a few figures covered in linen. Even the stones used for light were pitifully few. Faint shadows on the stone walls of the walkway changed with each person's movements. The hooded figure in front of Shi Shu revealed a pale hand from his wide sleeve. The hand was very thin, as if only a layer of skin was attached to the bones. The shape of the bones at the joints was very obvious. The palm of the hand was slightly raised, holding a string of objects. Some pieces of wood had been shaved into various shapes with holes drilled in the middle. They were then connected by straw ropes to form a closed loop. 4 fingers were slightly curled in the palm of the hand. His thumb rested on a piece of wood the size of a fingernail. Every piece of wood on the string was engraved with patterns, but not everyone could understand them. There was a circular hall in the underground palace. As he walked towards the center of the hall, the man in the cloak moved the wooden ornament on his hand with his thumb at a steady pace, as if he was an old man taking a leisurely stroll. When he was about to reach the center of the hall, he slightly raised his other hand that was not holding any wooden ornament and waved it slightly. Shi Shu, who was following behind, immediately stopped and bowed to the other party. He glanced at the 5 people guarding the hall. These 5 people were also covered in linen. He couldn't see their faces and they weren't breathing. Retracting his gaze, Shi Shu turned and left the hall. As he waved his hand, the hooded figure's footsteps didn't change, still maintaining his original speed and strength. When he walked into the center of the hall, when his foot landed on the last step, his thumb pressed against a piece of wood on the wooden ornament and paused. A flame suddenly lit up and drew an arc in front of him. The orange, red, and white fireball ignited. The flames weren't tall, but the entire underground palace was under an extremely strong pressure. All the illuminating stones in the underground palace shattered with a bang. The entire underground palace, except for the fire in the main hall, was plunged into darkness. The guards outside the underground palace suddenly felt as if there was a mountain pressing down on them. Bean-sized beads of sweat continued to slide down. After they were 100 meters away from the underground palace, the pressure gradually eased. When Shi Shu walked to the entrance of the underground palace, he felt a sense of collapse. When the pressure in the underground palace appeared, he hadn't walked out of the underground palace. He wasn't far from the entrance, only a distance of 10 steps. But these 10 steps, although it wasn't a long distance, made him sweat like he had just been fished out of the water. He gasped for breath as if he had just experienced a great battle. Waving his hand to block the people who came to support him under the pressure, Shi Shu walked forward with difficulty as if he was wearing heavy shackles. The further he went from the underground palace, the easier his feet became and the pressure on his body gradually decreased. After walking out of the underground palace and another 100 meters away, Shi Shu breathed a sigh of relief and turned to look at the underground palace. A stone door blocked the entrance to the underground palace. It made a loud bang. The yellow sand above seemed to be driven by the vibration and slid down. In the blink of an eye, the entrance to the underground palace was buried. Looking from a distance, only a sand dune could be seen. Chapter 792. Xiao Xian was trying his best to get used to this place. Although it was much better than when he first arrived, he still felt uncomfortable. Although he could still stand, he felt as though he was suspended in midair. It didn't feel like he was stepping on the ground, but he couldn't fall. He could still walk if he wanted to. It was really strange. He didn't have a physical body, but he could still hear and see. Xiao Xian had guessed that this place might have been created using the power of the fire seed. However, there were still many inconsistencies. The darkness around him also seemed to hide many things that couldn't be seen. It was mysterious and unpredictable. However, Xiao Xian didn't think too much about it. Soon he felt a strong wave of energy coming from somewhere. It was similar to the energy coming from the Yi family, but there were also obvious differences. Anyone could tell the difference between the two. A line of fire suddenly appeared in the void in the distance, drawing an arc in the place where the power fluctuations were. A ball of fire appeared at one end of the arc. Whether it was the arc of fire or the ball of fire, they were very different from the ones on the Yi family's side. The most obvious difference was that the ratio of the two colors in the flames was different. On the Yi family's side, The ratio of orange-red flames to white flames was almost 50-50. However, the arc of fire and ball of fire that appeared now was dominated by white flames, accounting for more than 2/3 of the flames. On the other end of the arc of fire, a figure appeared. It was a very clear figure that seemed to be flashing with fire. Rinpoche could even see the slight movement of the cloak that this person was wearing. Xiaoxian had already noticed that the stronger one was, the clearer the figure formed here. This clarity didn't refer to the appearance of the figure. Everyone was formed by flames, so he couldn't see their faces. On the E family's side, there were only orange, red and white flames. There were almost no other colors. The so-called clarity referred to the silhouette of each figure and the overall feeling of the figure. Xiaoxian was the weakest among them. This was because he could only vaguely make out the shape of a human. The flames fluttered, and it looked like a gust of wind could blow them away. In comparison, the E family was much clearer, especially the 3 leaders of the E family. But now this newcomer was even clearer than the 3 elders from the E family. It was as if all the flames that formed this figure were used to condense this figure. Not a single bit of the flames spread out. The edges became clearer and clearer, forming a clear boundary with the surrounding darkness. With just a glance, the difference in strength was immediately apparent. As soon as this figure appeared, Xiaoxian could clearly sense the tension in the Yi family. They were afraid. Yi Xiang. Yi Tuan asked in a low voice. Although Yi Xiang was superior to them in terms of strength and seniority, Yi Xiang was someone the Yi family was determined to get rid of. Hence, seniority did not matter at all. There was no respect in his tone as he called Yi Xiang by his name. His tone was filled with caution and caution. Yi Tuan had wanted to ask why Yi Xiang wanted to kill the Yi family. After all, Yi Xiang was still a member of the Yi family. Did he really want to wipe out the Yi family? Also, where did the important things the Yi family took away go? Did he really create those monsters in the desert? Yi Tuan had many questions to ask Yi Xiang, but Yi Xiang had no intention of answering. He did not even make a sound. Xiaoxian saw the newcomer look up at Yi Tuan's words. Then, without a word, he walked towards the Yi family. As he walked, the totem beneath his feet moved as well. The fireball in front of the arc of fire was not directly in front of him, but diagonally above him, moving with Yi Xiang's movements. Yi Tuan's heart tightened. He knew that Yi Xiang did not even want to talk to them. Without another word, he shouted, "Guard the formation." The 100 or so members of the Yi family were not here to attack, but to guard the formation. If they went out alone, they would only end up as cannon fodder. They were only useful when guarding the formation. These 100 people were the core and most outstanding members of the Yi family. The Yi family had really put in a lot of effort this time. A huge totem appeared beneath their feet and expanded. Their powers merged into one. Beneath their feet, including Yi Tuan and the other 2 elders, there was no small totem. Instead, there was a large Yi family totem. The curved path of flames formed a wall of fire in front of them. In front of the wall was a huge ball of fire, half orange-red and half white, exuding the powerful aura of a fire seed. Their combined might made one's heart tremble. Fiery light surged, and it was even more dazzling than when it first appeared. A fire pit. The aura and the flames made Xiaoxian feel like a temporary fire pit had been built. However, it was understandable. Blood and fire came from the same source. After the fire seed fused, everyone could be seen as a small fire seed. When these small fire seeds gathered together, they would form a large fire seed. Not only could it play a certain defensive role, it could also provide power to those nearby. However, although the combined aura of the 100 or so people looked powerful, Xiaoxian felt that many of the Yi family members did not seem confident at all. Solemn and nervous, this was probably how most of the Yi family felt. Go. Yi Tuan raised his hand. A bright white dot flew out of his palm. It passed through the fire and instantly transformed into a 20-meter-tall beast. It looked like a tiger or a leopard, but its figure was blurry. Flames rose around it. Although it was only made of fire, one could see that it was a lithe beast. A long howl that belonged to a beast rang out in the dark void, spreading in all directions. It was deafening. Xiaoxian was far away, but he felt like the roar was right next to his ear. It was so loud that his brain went numb. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he would have thought that it was a ferocious beast from the forest that was about to go on a killing spree. The beast arched its back like a taut bow. The next moment, it opened its back and sprinted forward. Every step it took covered nearly 100 meters, heading straight for Yi Xiang. It sped up, leaving a long tail of fire behind it. The 2 parties were originally quite far away, but in the blink of an eye, they were close. A bone-reading beast. Bone reading was the beast bones used by the Yi family for divination. Everything came with a price. Everything was balanced, including the Yi family's ability to foresee the future. Divination relied on the vitality of animals and plants. For example, bone reading. The Yi family's ancestors discovered that even the bones of dead beasts contained vitality. Their divination relied on the vitality of the beasts in the oracle bones to predict the past or the future. Similarly, the Yi family often used this method in their battles. The objects that everyone used for divination, regardless of whether it was the bone divination branch, the armor divination branch, or the various divination techniques that were now mixed together, all possessed a certain amount of vitality, including stones. Yes, stones. The Yi family's ancestors believed that stones were the bones of the earth and contained a great deal of vitality. Hence, after the oracle bones, they began to add stones to their divination. These stones were not randomly picked up but were carefully selected to contain vitality. For example, the jade stones used by Yi Zong and Yi Qi were used to carry out their divination using the vitality of these stones. Whether it was the oracle bones or jade stones, regardless of whether they were found or gifted, as long as they held them in their hands, they could be used for divination or for internal battles within the Yi family. Xiao Xian had heard about this from Yi Si and Yi Zong, but this was the first time he had seen the Yi family use bone reading in this way. Yi Tuan's flaming beast must have been the beast's form when it was alive. Seeing this, Xiao Xian suddenly remembered the ancestral bone ornaments he was wearing. Speaking of which, the bone ornaments left behind by his ancestors were also made from his own bones. Could the power contained within them be the vitality left behind by his ancestors? He thought about the flaming giant that had appeared many times in the past and compared it to the Yi family's methods. Although they were different, there were similarities. It didn't matter if it was similar or not. Xiao Xian didn't have time to think too much about it because they were about to collide. A beast roar even louder than before rang out again. Accompanying this roar was the bone-reading beast's final leap towards Yi Xiang. To everyone's surprise, Yi Xiang did not use the bone-reading beast or the shell-reading beast, nor did he use the divination techniques of the other Yi family members. He did not even try to dodge. Instead, he took a step towards the bone-reading beast and raised his hand. A strange energy rippled from his hand and collided with the bone-reading beast. Chapter 793. Compared to the beast's ferocious aura, Yi Xiang was not only small in size, he did not give off a powerful aura either. Yi Xiang and the fire beast, one was outwardly radiant while the other was inwardly restrained. Both gave off a strange vibe. This scene was not balanced. However, everyone had an answer that they did not want to admit. While the people far away were not affected, Xiao Xian could sense that Yi Xiang's raised hand seemed to be restraining a powerful force within a limited area. This was why Yi Xiang gave off a reserved aura. A direct clash. When the raised hand collided with the flaming beast, an indescribable aura filled the area. The bone-reading beast's flames were blocked, as if it had hit an invisible wall. It could not advance any further. Boom. The collision of power brought about a powerful tremor, causing the dark void to distort. A trace of frenzied aura recklessly exploded, as if it wanted to tear apart everything it came into contact with. Everything that stood in its way was shattered into pieces. In the dark void, it was as if a violent hurricane had suddenly appeared. At that moment, it made people feel as if there was an unparalleled force flowing in all directions. On the battlefield, the bone-reading beast's flaming body was not only unable to advance any further in front of the hand, it began to crack from head to toe, all the way to its elongated tail. Not a single part of it was spared. A bright white dot appeared as the flaming beast's body cracked open. The next moment it was caught by the hand. The 5 fingers clenched tightly, the sound of bones cracking could be heard. That sound did not come from the hand, but from the bright white light in the hand. The light disappeared. And with the sound of bones breaking, the massive flame behemoth seemed to explode from the inside. Countless sparks splashed out, and the originally powerful energy fluctuations became even more violent. It was as if the entire void was shaking and shaking. Gusts of wind swept out from the battlefield along with the splashing sparks. The orange-red sparks were like brilliant fireworks, flying from the battlefield to the farthest reaches of the void. The resulting storm seemed to blow people away. Blowing people away? Yes, the silhouettes of many of the figures were blurred by the tremor. The flames that made up the figures seemed to be dispersing. Even the 3 elders of the Yi family were blurred for a moment. Even Xiao Xian, who was far away from the battlefield, was affected. It was as if his entire body was locked in a cage and he was being violently shaken. His head was dizzy, and his consciousness was momentarily scattered. It was uncomfortable, but Xiao Xian endured it and quickly gathered his consciousness again. However, although it was uncomfortable and he was still affected, Xiao Xian also gained something. The scene just now gave Xiao Xian a great deal of inspiration. Every trace of energy fluctuation had its reason for existence, and Xiao Xian was able to deduce its origin and cause from these details. Xiao Xian realized that the clash between Yi Tuan's bone-reading beast and Yi Xiang was not a battle intent brought about by another form of life, but a push from the consciousness of the exorcist. A push from the consciousness. Xiao Xian felt as if he had found a way to leave this place. However, he did not want to leave just yet. It was rare for him to meet the legendary Yi Xiang of the Yi family, and he was unwilling to leave just like that. He had yet to see how powerful Yi Xiang was. Furthermore, observing Yi Xiang's abilities was his goal in coming here. Let's wait and see, Xiao Xian thought. The scattered sparks seemed to be scorching hot, but the Yi family felt a chill run down their spines. This was just a test from Yi Tuan, but it was not a casual attack. If it had been used on anyone else, it would have been a fatal blow. However, against Yi Xiang, who was walking slowly towards him, it was reduced to nothingness in a single blow. What little confidence they had left fell again, and fear rose in their hearts. The rumors were true. Yi Xiang was indeed powerful. This was only a probing exchange. His true strength was still unknown for the time being. For the Yi family, the unknown was the scariest. Yi Tuan shuddered in disbelief. Even though Xiao Xian could not see his face in his current form, he could guess his expression. The white light was the fire beast's source of power, a bone that gathered all the life energy in the beast's bones. Just now, the fire beast's source of power had been destroyed. It could no longer exist. At the same time, in the Yi family's mansion in the royal city, a bone in front of Yi Tuan shattered with a crack. Amidst the oppressive silence, the cracking sound came abruptly. Everyone standing in the surroundings looked over. A middle-aged man nearby stared at the broken bone in front of Yi Tuan, his eyes almost popping out of their sockets. It's broken, it's broken. A large bead of sweat dripped from the man's forehead. Broken meant the bone was useless. In the Yi family's words, the bone was truly dead, with no life energy left in it. It wasn't that he hadn't expected this situation, but it came too quickly, so quickly that the uneasiness in his heart grew stronger. Each bone Yi Tuan used came from a powerful, fearsome beast. The fact that it could survive to this day meant that it came from a giant beast that looked like a tiger or a leopard. It was a ferocious, fearsome beast when it was alive. Its bones had great vitality. But now this bone had shattered, and it shattered very cleanly. It shattered into pieces almost instantly, not giving anyone time to react at all. How long had it been? This was not good. This was the same thought that came to everyone's mind. In the endless darkness of the void. Yi Xiang, who had paused for a moment because of the fire beast, looked at Yi Tuan and the rest, speaking in a rare moment. Your generation is not good. His tone was flat and emotionless, and it was impossible to tell his age. It was even more impossible to guess what the speaker was feeling at this moment. If it had been anyone else, they would have exuded an indescribable cold arrogance. But Yi Xiang was different. He exuded an eerie calmness, though no one knew how much madness was hidden under that calmness. Yi Xiang's rare words were the first he had spoken since he appeared. In layman's terms, he was calling Yi Tuan and the rest a bunch of trash. This was a resounding slap to the faces of all the Yi family members, including Yi Tuan and the other two old men. Yi Tuan was infuriated to be rejected by a senior of the family, and a traitor of the Yi family at that. But he had to admit that the test had surprised them. Yi Xiang turned to look in Xiao Xian's direction. He could not see Yi Xiang's face, but Xiao Xian could feel his eyes boring into his brain and heart. At this moment he felt like he was being seen through by Yi Xiang's eyes. Xiao Xian. Why are you looking at me like that? Xiao Xian was prepared to retreat at the first sign of trouble. This was the Yi family's home ground. He would not gain any advantage here. He would not fight the Yi family directly, much less the unknown Yi Xiang. If he did, Xiao Xian would have to retreat. He was not a member of the Yi family anyway. He did not have the family's pride to fight Yi Xiang. Fortunately, Yi Xiang did not continue to stare at Xiao Xian. After a brief glance, he turned to Yi Tuan and the rest and started walking again. His speed and distance were exactly the same as before, as if measured by a machine. Xiao Xian had a feeling that Yi Xiang was like a ticking time bomb with a dial. His legs were the needle on the dial. When the needle reached the end, it would cause an even more destructive storm. Chapter 794. Xiao Xian watched as Yixiang lifted the hand that had smacked the bone-reading beast away, then drew an arc in front of him. In the next instant, the arc of fire on the Yi family totem under Yixiang's feet expanded abruptly, spreading to both sides like a raging river. The flames on the fire path rose higher, no longer restrained. Like a gathering of 10,000 beasts, they were about to charge forward. Yixiang's totem had been the size of a normal totem, but now it had expanded to the size of a few hundred people. It was about the same size as Yi Tuan's totem, perhaps even larger. Yi Tuan felt even more pressured by the fact that one person could do this. If possible, he did not want to fight such a person, but he had no choice. Xiao Xian's brows twitched. Even from afar he could clearly feel the pressure spreading from the other side. Although his body was not here, Xiao Xian felt his hair stand on end, as if a cold current was running through his body. This was not going to work. Yi Tuan's probing earlier had affected Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian would not be able to avoid an even bigger storm. The next clash between the two sides would be a real battle of strength. Strong against strong, tough against tough. If Xiao Xian continued to stay here, he would become cannon fodder. It was not safe, it was too dangerous. Was it worth the risk to stay? After some thought, Xiao Xian decided to leave. Just now, when the two sides collided for the first time, he had figured out a way to leave. He planned to give it a try. It would be best if he could leave, but if he couldn't, he would retreat a little further and then be prepared to welcome the impact of the storm. This was a form that surpassed his consciousness. It was similar to when he controlled the flame giant. Xiao Xian thought as he observed himself. As if parting a cloud, Xiao Xian saw a white dot. Xiao Xian suddenly thought of Yi Tuan's bone-reading beast. Like the bone-reading beast, the white dot was the core of Xiao Xian's existence. It was similar to but not limited to. It also had powerful life force like a soul. At this moment, there were many more flames wrapped around the bright white. What Xiao Xian needed to do now was to remove all the flames that were wrapped around the bright white flame. Using only his consciousness, he could use the power available in this state. Although it looked like he had left his body, he could still use many powers such as totemic power and another power in Xiao Xian's body. What Xiao Xian was using now was a power that was not from the Yinjiao fire seed. A thin white line of fire appeared around the white flame. Under the control of Xiao Xian's consciousness, it circled around the white flame. Every time it circled around the white flame, a part of the flame would be taken away. 1 circle, 2 circles. At first, the white line of fire slowly circled around, but later, it skillfully sped up to form a whirlpool, enveloping the bright white and red flames. Bit by bit, the white flames were taken away by the white line of fire. The white flames also gradually became thicker, and the surroundings were covered by the red flames. This was only happening in his sea of consciousness. In this dark void, the human-shaped flame on Xiao Xian's body decreased from bottom to top at a speed visible to the naked eye, as if it was disintegrating on its own according to a specific pattern. Yixiang, who was about to attack Yi Tuan, paused, turning to look at Xiao Xian. Yi Tuan saw Yixiang's reaction and glanced over as well, only to see half of the figure disappearing. There was a person standing there, of course people would notice. Although Yi Tuan focused all his attention on Yixiang, many people from the Yi family were also watching Xiao Xian. Their target this time was not Xiao Xian, but they would not trust a tribesman, especially one with old grudges. Of course they had to be cautious. The moment Xiao Xian started moving, the guards noticed that Xiao Xian was about to leave. However, they were more concerned about Yixiang and pretended not to see Xiao Xian. After all, Xiao Xian was about to leave. They did not expect Xiao Xian's disappearance to attract Yixiang's attention. Yixiang even stopped in his tracks. When Xiao Xian completely disappeared, Yi Tuan sensed carefully but could not sense Xiao Xian's presence. Right now there was only the Yi family's fire seed's aura in the air, nothing else. They had wondered if Xiao Xian was the unforeseen accident, but now it seemed that was not the case. Yi Tuan did not know whether to sigh in relief or disappointment. His emotions were complicated. Xiao Xian from the Yinjiao tribe did not have the Yi family's bloodline and his fire seed's flame was different from theirs. However, Yi Tuan's first impression of him was not out of place, just strange. But now was not the time to think about it. Questions could be left for later. Perhaps the kid was worried about being caught in the crossfire and ran away. What happened just now must have scared him. Many people from the Yi family thought so. Calm down. Yi Tuan shouted. This was to distract them from paying attention to anything else. After Yi Tuan's reprimand, the people guarding the formation calmed down. It was good that the tribesmen had left, they did not have to worry about him. They did not have to worry about an outsider becoming an unexpected factor in this battle, Nor did they have to worry about Xiao Xian appearing again. Did he think he could come and go as he pleased? Most of them would make ample preparations before entering this place. After all, it required a lot of energy and it was easy for the mind to get tired. Although it was easier to exit than when they entered, it was not that easy. Only a small portion of the Yi family could enter this place. It was already a surprise that a tribesman could make it here. Leaving safely could only be considered lucky. The Yi family no longer thought about Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian's appearance and departure was like a pebble thrown into a vast lake. It only caused small ripples, not waves. On the other side, when Xiao Xian opened his eyes, he felt dizzy for a moment. His vision darkened and his brain was very tired. It took him a while to recover. He looked around him. Cha-Cha was perched on a nearby cliff, one paw pressing down on a snake as thick as an adult's thigh. It was pecking at its food. This kind of snake was not considered big in this forest, but in this area, it was already a rare big snake. After all, there were very few beasts living in this mountain range. Noticing that Xiao Xian was awake, Cha-Cha tossed the half-dead snake in front of Xiao Xian and hissed twice. "I'm fine. I'm just a little tired." Xiao Xian patted Cha-Cha's bird head. He got up and slowly walked 2 steps. His feet stepped on the firm ground and he felt the strong support of the ground. This place was completely different from the void. Xiao Xian looked at Yi Zong and Yi Qi. He saw that they were still sitting in the same position as before. However, the jade stones on the square plates in front of them had changed positions. The biggest difference was the Yi family totem where Yi Zong and Yi Qi were sitting. Compared to before, the arc of fire in the totem was bigger and brighter. The flames were also taller. Naturally, the pressure it gave off was greater. The slaves guarding near the two of them were also further away. Yi Zong and Yi Qi were among the people guarding the Yi family. Xiao Xian did not find it strange that such a change would occur under the influence of 100 people. Xiao Xian did not look at the two of them. He felt that he had used up too much energy. He went hunting with Cha-Cha in the distance to find food. After eating and drinking, he even slept for a long time. His fatigue had completely disappeared. Xiao Xian thought for a moment and sat down again. He took out a straw rope and tried to enter the void using the 8-rope knot method. With his previous success, this time, Xiao Xian only wasted 3 straw ropes. The dark void appeared again. With his previous experience, Xiao Xian quickly steadied himself and suppressed the discomfort. Xiao Xian had been thinking that he had already left to eat and sleep. By the time he returned, the two sides should be almost done fighting, right? But when Xiao Xian looked over, Yi Xiang and Yi Tuan did not look much different from when he left. The two sides, who had just calmed down and prepared for battle, realized that the person who had just left had reappeared. Yi Tuan was about to throw out a bone divination when he froze. Yi Xiang, Yi Tuan, the Yi family. His aura was different from the Yi family, so the Yi family recognized him immediately. Why was he here again? How was this possible? The first time was a coincidence, a stroke of luck. What about the second time? They thought it was a stroke of luck to be able to enter this place and leave safely, that tribesmen would be able to brag about it. Who knew he would appear again? And this time, Xiao Xian's figure was more solid, not as blurry as the first time. In fact, he looked similar to many of the Yi family guards. They would not believe that Xiao Xian did not know how to enter this place. Sensing everyone's stares, Yi Zong and Yi Qi said in unison, "It wasn't us." They really did not tell Xiao Xian how to enter this place. If not for the fact that the situation was not right and there was no time to explain, Yi Zong and Yi Qi would have sworn a long oath to prove their innocence. Everyone had just calmed down and prepared for battle when Xiao Xian's sudden appearance and disappearance made them uneasy again. Especially Yi Tuan. Since when could a tribesman do things that even the Yi family could not do? Yi Xiang did not say anything, but he stopped what he was doing. Both sides stared at Xiao Xian, who had reappeared. Xiao Xian was also confused. The battle had not begun. Xiao Xian had already noticed something strange about this place. He had left for so long, even had a meal and a nap. Why had the battle not begun yet? Xiao Xian had a guess. This place was different from the real world. The time was different. Chapter 795. To verify his suspicions, Xiao Xian decided to leave the dark world. The Yi family had not started fighting yet, and Xiao Xian felt that his reappearance had attracted the attention of the Yi family, especially Yi Xiang. Yi Xiang had been watching him ever since he appeared. Xiao Xian only wanted to see how capable Yi Xiang was. He did not want to provoke Yi Xiang here. Even though he was surrounded by darkness, the atmosphere was too tense. Xiao Xian didn't want to stay here and risk his life. He thought it would be better to wait until the two sides were almost done fighting before he came back. By then, both sides would have exhausted a lot of energy and wouldn't spend much time watching him. When he opened his eyes again, Xiao Xian saw a pile of animal bones not far away. They were the remains of a snake that Cha-Cha had eaten. Before Xiao Xian left and entered the dark world, Cha-Cha had just finished eating the snake. Recently, Cha-Cha had been eating snakes the most. Perhaps it was because he had almost been eaten by a snake when he first came to Eagle Mountain, but Cha-Cha had always been hostile towards snakes. He often caught snakes to eat in the forest and ate even more on the way to Eagle Mountain. Xiao Xian remembered the snake bones not far away from Xiao Xian. It had horns on both sides of its face and its skull had horns as well. This type of snake was rare and Xiao Xian had only seen Cha-Cha eat it once before he entered the dark world. Therefore, the snake skull not far away must be the one that Cha-Cha had eaten. Xiao Xian felt that he hadn't been away for long this time. Although he had stopped for a while in that strange dark world to observe the people on both sides, it had only been about 10 minutes. But now Xiao Xian found that the blood on the snake's bones had changed color, and some of the remaining meat had begun to dry. According to the environment, it should have been nearly half a day since Cha-Cha finished eating the snake. As expected, the timing was off. Cha-Cha stood on top of the mountain wall, his pair of eagle eyes vigilantly staring at the surroundings. Ichi and Yizong were still in the same state as before. At least they did not seem to have changed. Xiao Xian changed his strategy this time. Since the time between the two parties was not equal and he did not know if there was a fixed pattern, he did not act rashly. He decided to wait for the two parties to start fighting before going over to observe the situation. Instead of going over to investigate again and again, it was better to keep an eye on Ichi and Yizong. This way he could save a lot of energy. Time flowed slower in the dark world. Yizong and Ichi's changes might not appear quickly. Therefore, while waiting, Xiao Xian began to explore the method of using his consciousness to control them. Since this method could allow him to enter places that ordinary people could not reach and see figures that others could not see, then, could he also discover other things? Xiao Xian did not know if he could discover something new without entering the void. He could only try it himself. Xiao Xian did not use the 8-rope knot method. Instead, he relied on the 2 times he had entered the dark world and the insights he had gained from the knots to explore on his own. Because he found that there were some similarities with the power of the ancestral bone ornaments, many of the key points were not difficult to understand. First, he had to find the bright white in his body. Perhaps it was similar to the legendary soul, a type of special life force that was based on the body. Because of his previous experience, Xiao Xian did not spend too much time this time and found the bright white in his body. Next, Xiao Xian used his consciousness to stimulate the power of the fire seed, using the bright white to find other similar existences. This time, Xiao Xian did not use the power of Yanjiao's fire seed. Instead, he used a special power in his body that was similar to the power of the fire seed. In his sea of consciousness, a white line of fire appeared and surged towards the bright white. Then it began to revolve around the bright white. Every time it revolved around the bright white, flames would appear. When the bright white was completely engulfed in flames, a spot of darkness appeared in the center. Then, the conspicuous black spot in the light gradually expanded to form a rotating black hole. When the black hole, which was engulfed in flames, expanded to the point where no flames could be seen, Xiao Xian saw a dark world that was similar to the place where the Yi family had fought. However, this dark world was different from the one in the Yi family. Although it looked the same, Xiao Xian felt that it was a completely different place. It was a similar dark world. It seemed that there was more than one such place. If possible, Xiao Xian wanted to learn more about it from the Yi family. Upon closer inspection, Xiao Xian realized that it was not completely dark. There were some faint spots of light like looking at the stars in the sky when there were thin clouds. After sensing for a bit, Xiao Xian realized that it was not dark to begin with. It was just that they were too far away. With a shift of his consciousness, Xiao Xian realized that the things that were far away were starting to come closer. No, perhaps under the urging of his consciousness, he was rapidly approaching that place. As he got closer, the things that were originally not very clear became very clear. As long as Xiao Xian maintained this level of perception, he could continue to see the clear spots of light in the darkness. Previously, he had not been able to see them clearly. Now that he was closer, he realized that there were many faint flashes of blue light surrounding these spots of light. The range was not small either. Xiao Xian even felt as though he was standing in the middle of the universe. The aura of these spots of light gave Xiao Xian a sense of familiarity. It was not the aura of any tribe that he knew of. It was the aura of a beast. On Chacha's body there was a similar aura. Could it be something from Eagle Mountain? As Xiao Xian continued to increase the intensity of his perception, he began to expend more and more energy. As his perception grew stronger, Xiao Xian could see more. The faint blue lights were actually blue flames. Similar to Xiao Xian's figure in this dark world, these blue flames also formed some strange shapes. For example, the bone-reading beasts used by the Yi family. Every spot of light represented a giant beast, and the figures formed by the blue flames were the rough outlines of the giant beasts. The spots of light at the core of these figures were not very close to each other. It was not that they were deliberately distancing themselves from each other, but that these giant beasts were simply too large. Even if they were piled up together, they would not be able to get close to each other. Even though the spots of light were not very close to each other, there were still a lot of them. From a distance they looked like a galaxy of stars. Xiao Xian did not count how many spots of light there were. His attention was now on the figures formed by the blue flames. These figures were huge. Even the bone-reading beasts used by Yi Tuan and the rest were like palms compared to them. Xiao Xian had never hunted a giant beast like this in all his years of hunting. Other than the giant mountain eagles Xiao Xian had seen on the icy peak, there was another species that was not a giant eagle. It was the terrifyingly large crocodile he had encountered in the river when he went to Gongjia Valley. However, even the giant eagle and the terrifying crocodile on the mountaintop were slightly inferior in front of these figures. There were too many figures stacked on top of each other. Xiao Xian couldn't separate them all at once. Although he could not see them clearly, Xiao Xian was sure they were not in the shape of a giant mountain eagle. He had used too much energy and it was difficult to continue. Xiao Xian retreated from the dark world first. He would take a closer look after he recovered some energy. Opening his eyes, Xiao Xian wiped the sweat off his face. His back was drenched in sweat from overexertion. The blue flame figures must be the true form of the giant beasts when they were alive. As he pondered, Xiao Xian turned to look at the mountain wall. Even with his special vision he could only see thick rocks. Xiao Xian could not see anything on the other side of Eagle Mountain for now, so he could not know if there were giant skeletons at the foot of the mountain. He could only use his consciousness to enter another dark world to see what the naked eye could not see. Cha-Cha noticed Xiao Xian's abnormality and came over to call out worriedly. "I'm fine," Xiao Xian said as he stared at Cha-Cha. He looked at Cha-Cha carefully from head to toe, which confused Cha-Cha. "Ha!" Cha-Cha called out again. "Cha-Cha, do you know what your ancestors are? Do you know what they look like?" Xiao Xian asked. After hearing Xiao Xian's question, Cha-Cha paused for a moment, then looked up at the sky, as if there was something in the sky that attracted his attention. Then he looked around vigilantly but didn't look at Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian was familiar with Cha-Cha's temperament. It was obviously avoiding the question. It did not want to answer Xiao Xian's question. Of course, it knew what the ancestor looked like. That was a secret of the giant mountain eagles. Only the eagles that had entered Eagle Mountain knew about it. Chapter 796. Cha-Cha didn't want to answer, so Xiao Xian didn't force him to answer. Xiao Xian knew from the Hui tribe that the great mountain eagles had many secrets. They didn't even bring anyone with them to Eagle Mountain. It was rare for Xiao Xian to follow a great mountain eagle to Eagle Mountain, and that was because he was raised by Xiao Xian and this was his first time going to Eagle Mountain. Otherwise, other eagles wouldn't have allowed humans to follow them. Even if someone found Eagle Mountain, they might not be able to climb to the highest peak of the ice field. Even if they did, they wouldn't be able to fly with the great mountain eagles to the real Eagle Mountain. It was just like Xiao Xian's situation back then. This tall and long mountain range was only a barrier. The real Eagle Mountain was where Xiao Xian saw the eagles flying after the mist on the peak of the ice field dispersed. The real Eagle Mountain was even taller than this mountain range. He couldn't see the top or the bottom. No one knew what was at the bottom of Eagle Mountain. However, if he explored it on a spiritual level through the special world of darkness, distance and barriers would no longer be a problem. After a short rest and some food, Xiao Xian glanced over at Yi Zong and Yi Zong. He noticed that the Yi family totem was brighter than before. However, that was the only difference. There weren't any obvious changes. Looking away, Xiao Xian decided to check out the figures that he suspected to be the ancestors of the great mountain eagles. With his previous success, Xiao Xian entered the world of darkness even faster this time. He walked up to the figures made of blue flames and counted them carefully. The number was astonishing. Many. Too many. Thousands, maybe even tens of thousands or even more. Although the figures made of blue flames contained life energy, it was different from the life energy of real living creatures. It was closer to the bone-reading beasts used by the E family. Of course, they were only similar in nature and weren't exactly the same. Moreover, the strength of life energy of these giant figures was very different from that of the E family's bone-reading beasts. These figures made of blue flames had greater life energy. They were like scattered fire seeds stacked together, just like the E family's formation. Countless figures of giant beasts were stacked together like firewood, emitting an ancient aura. The soul of Eagle Mountain. This word suddenly popped into Xiao Xian's mind. He tried to identify the individual giant beasts, but they were stacked so tightly together that he couldn't see them clearly. However, Xiao Xian had a rough idea of their general shape. They were indeed different from the giant mountain eagles, but they were somewhat similar to the small pterosaur he got out of the ice. The Cha-Cha didn't want to tell him any secrets about Eagle Mountain, but Xiao Xian was almost certain that these giant beasts were the secret of Eagle Mountain. They were the ancestors of the giant mountain eagles, the real ancient giant beasts. They were also one of the overlords that once ruled the world. Perhaps, the time they existed was the era that the pterosaur that had survived from the ice was familiar with. A long time ago, when the Yinjiao tribe was still trapped on the other side of the boundless river and isolated from the rest of the world, Xiao Xian heard from the shaman that the giant mountain eagles had their own beliefs. They couldn't be tamed, and they couldn't accept the power of fire seeds from other tribes. Perhaps these giant mountain eagles were the beliefs of the giant mountain eagles. Generations of giant mountain eagles flew thousands of miles to Eagle Mountain. No matter if it was a young eagle or an old eagle that came here for the first time, they would all be reborn after coming here. It was similar to the awakening of totemic power or leveling up of totemic warriors. Many of these changes might have been caused by the stacked blue figures. These blue figures formed the fire pit of the giant mountain eagles, and they were the real core of the entire Eagle Mountain. When he first saw the frozen pterosaur, Xiao Xian wondered where the giant beasts that once ruled the world and trampled humans at the bottom of the food chain had gone. Many tribes had records of their ancestors that recorded and preserved the ancient history, but there were very few records about the ancient era. Many tribes with a long history had the same story, but it was from the perspective of the tribe's fire seed. It was said that a long time ago humans were still prey to the beast. They weren't strong enough, and it was the fire seed that gave them power. It was the fire seed that brought humans to where they were today. No one knew what happened in the ancient times, but based on the evidence he found, he was sure that the fire seed had indeed changed the world. However, it wasn't just humans that changed the world. Every living thing in the world was changed too. Perhaps humans were the smartest, and they were the first to understand the use of the fire seed. The soul of Eagle Mountain was one of the pieces of evidence. Eagle Mountain wasn't the only place in the world that was similar to it. As for the other similar secret places that were unknown to the public, it was still unknown where they were. The world was so big that they only knew a corner of this forest. There were many more places that humans hadn't explored yet, but Xiao Xian had a feeling that they would come across them in the future. It was just a hunch. His head started to hurt, and he used up too much energy, so Xiao Xian left the world of darkness. As soon as he opened his eyes, Xiao Xian sensed the fluctuations of the fire seed's power. He looked at Yi Zong and the other man. The totemic flames that had been brightening were fluctuating, dimming for a moment, then brightening again. It had begun. For such fluctuations to occur, the two sides must have started fighting. As Xiao Xian rested, he observed Yi Zong and the other man's totemic flames. When Yi Zong and the other man's totemic flames weakened, the battle would have ended and Xiao Xian could go over to check it out. In the dark, empty world where the Yi family resided. After Xiao Xian disappeared again, Yi Xiang, who had been watching the Yi family, turned slightly to look at where Xiao Xian had appeared. After staring for a while, Yi Xiang made his move. His hand that had been holding the string of wooden ornaments began to move. His movements were small and could be missed if one wasn't paying attention. Yi Tuan, who had been watching Yi Xiang cautiously, was surprised. Others might not be able to tell, but he knew what Yi Xiang was doing. Yi Xiang was performing a divination. Why was he performing a divination at a time like this? And the target of the divination could be the missing Yanjiao. Regardless of who Yi Xiang's target was or why he was doing it, Yi Tuan had no time to think about it. He decided to seize this opportunity. Everything else could wait. The only thing they wanted to do now was to find a chance to deal with Yi Xiang. Without further ado, Yi Tuan roared, "Go!" Almost at the same time, the three Yi family elders, including Yi Tuan, attacked. 4 bright spots flew out from each of their hands. Just like the bone-reading beast, these spots transformed into giant beasts as they flew past the flames. Some were slender, some were heavy, some had carapaces, and some were like meteors with fireballs. These balls were images projected from the stones used for divination. Yi Tuan and the others had made ample preparations before this. It was evident from the timing and momentum of their attacks. Under the aura created by the three of them, it gave people the feeling of a river flowing into the sea. 12 beasts and stones projected by bone, carapaces and stones shot towards Yi Xiang. The combined power of the three elders was astounding. Even in this dark void, it brought about a gust of wind. Among the people guarding the formation, those who were slightly weaker all had their breathing disrupted at this moment. Their chests were oppressed and they could only feel the tremors under their feet. Their legs were numb for a moment and their chests were oppressed. It was as if there was not enough air to breathe. Yi Xiang did not panic at the sudden attack. He did not move or turn around, one hand still holding the wooden ornaments. Facing the Yi family, he raised his other arm towards the arc of fire in the totem, as though he was casually shaking off dust from his sleeve. He waved his arm downwards, pointing at the arc of fire not far away. The moment Yi Xiang swung his arm down, the arc of fire on the totem suddenly flared up as if someone had poured oil on it. The flames grew 10 times bigger. By then the bone-reading beasts had reached them. They did not slow down in the face of the wall of fire, charging straight into it. The moment they collided, there was a sudden explosion of power. The wall of fire in the arc of fire in front of Yi Xiang spewed out like lava from a volcano, its aura spreading outwards. As the attacks of the bone-reading beasts and the bone-reading stones collided, booming sounds rang out continuously. The fire wall formed by the elongated flames was like a sturdy city wall, blocking the concentrated attacks. The flickering of the flames was no longer the sound of a normal bonfire being blown by the wind, but more like the hysterical roar of a ferocious beast. The blossoming heat wave swept up the exploding sparks and splashed in all directions, flying as far as the eye could see. If one could see the expressions on everyone's faces, they would have noticed the change in Yi Tuan and the other two's eyes. When they launched their attack, their eyes were burning with anticipation, hoping that this attack would work. Even if they could not seriously injure Yi Xiang, just inflicting some damage on him would be enough for them to be excited. But very quickly, the anticipation in their eyes and the flames of desire in their hearts were mostly extinguished. What replaced it was shock, intense disappointment, and sorrow that was beginning to spread. It was just that no one knew about this. This was the first large-scale collision between the two sides. There was no sand or pebbles here, but everyone felt like they were in the middle of a storm, their bodies about to fall apart. The bone-reading beasts attacked in a frenzy, determined to break through the wall even at the cost of their own lives. At their peak, one of the beasts opened its mouth, only an arm's length away from Yi Xiang. That was how ferocious and frenzied their attacks were. But unlike the fire path, Yi Xiang was calm on the other side of the fire path. Not a single spark flew in his direction. Even when the bone-reading beasts were only an arm's length away, he did not make any extra movements. After waving his hand, he continued what he was doing as if he did not notice anything. He was just defending, not even glancing at Yi Tuan. Yi Xiang maintained his posture as if the combined attack of the three did not matter at all. Ignored. Blatant disdain. Yi Tuan and the others were already furious when they heard him say, "Your generation is not good." Now he was using reality to prove to the Yi family that he was not lying. This was Yi Xiang, the one the Yi family had failed to kill back then. The Yi family was unlucky. On the other side, when Xiao Xian noticed that the totemic flames around Yi Zong and Yi Tuan were beginning to change, he did not divert his attention to anything else. Instead he kept watch. The totemic flames around Yi Zong and Yi Tuan grew stronger at first, then began to ripple violently. The two Yi Zong and Yi Tuan seemed to be under great pressure, their bones creaking and their veins popping under their skin. Looks like the Yi family is not doing too well either, Xiao Xian thought. This situation lasted for 3 days before the totemic flames around Yi Zong and Yi Tuan slowed down. It's over? Xiao Xian secretly guessed but immediately denied it. It shouldn't be so soon. He had waited here for 3 days, but on the other side not much time had passed. Perhaps the clash between the two sides had just come to an end. Should he go over and take a look? Let's see if the Yi family has the upper hand, or if the mysterious unlucky has the upper hand. Xiao Xian had been waiting for the past few days, keeping himself in good condition, ready to enter the world of darkness again at any time. Chapter 797. Xiao Xian had just appeared in this dark world where the Yi family was fighting when he felt a wave of heat wash over him. His vision was filled with balls of fire. Without thinking too much, he mobilized the power of his fire seed and used it as a shield to block the large balls of flames that were smashing towards him like a group of meteors. Judging from the situation, the Yi family must have fought at least once while he was away. While he was thinking, a spear of fire shot towards Xiao Xian. Sensing the approaching danger, Xiao Xian did not have time to think. His body reflexively took 2 steps back. The spear of orange-red flames almost brushed past Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian could even feel the scorching heat from the spear. It felt like he would have been burned if he had been 1 step slower. "You're finally here." A slightly hoarse and indifferent voice rang out. Xiao Xian looked up. It was Yi Xiang. But unlike his previous nonchalant tone, Yi Xiang's words were laced with murderous intent. The center of the battlefield looked calm, but anyone could tell that a large-scale battle had just taken place here. There were several bone-reading beasts on the Yi family's side. There were also some balls of fire that he could not identify. There were a total of 12 of them. Even though he could not see their faces, Xiao Xian could sense the tension in the Yi family's camp. It was obvious that they had not had the upper hand in the previous battles. Even though they looked powerful and imposing, they could not hide their anxiety. Their morale was unstable and they lacked confidence. Yi Xiang was still standing there alone. He did not look much different from when Xiao Xian left last time. If not for the fact that Xiao Xian had been keeping an eye on the Yi family's situation, keeping an eye on Yi Zhong's movements even when he was not here, and seeing the scattered balls of fire when he arrived, no one would have thought that Yi Xiang had just fought someone. Unlike the commotion in the Yi family camp, Yi Xiang looked too calm, so calm that it sent chills down everyone's spines. The Yi family did not pay much attention to Xiao Xian's appearance. Right now, most of them were not in the mood to think about this tribesman who came and went as he pleased. Only Yi Tuan had looked at Xiao Xian for a few seconds when he appeared. After that, they stared at Yi Xiang warily, waiting for his next move. Yi Tuan's heart was bitter and sorrowful. He did not know Yi Xiang's true strength from the earlier clash, but he had a rough idea. Yi Xiang was indeed much stronger than they had imagined. The 100 of them would not be able to do anything to Yi Xiang, much less gain the upper hand. Yi Tuan also felt that the once powerful Yi family was beginning to decline. Beneath their prosperous facade they were now so weak. Yi Tuan could not refute Yi Xiang's words when he first appeared. "Yi Xiang's your generation is no good," was the first slap in the face. They wanted to retaliate, but reality proved that they were slapped again, and this time it was even more painful. As for Xiao Xian, Yi Tuan did not expect Xiao Xian to be able to defeat Yi Xiang. If they could not do it, this tribesman was even worse. However, they might be able to use this tribesman's appearance to their advantage. While Yi Tuan's mind was in turmoil, Yi Xiang paid no attention to the Yi family camp. Instead he was staring at Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian felt 2 sharp glints shooting out of Yi Xiang's eyes. This person was coming for him. Murderous intent. Even more so than the Yi family camp. Xiao Xian, why was there such a deep grudge? Yi Xiang had caused trouble for Rock Hill City and turned Xiao Xian into a zombie. Of course, Yi Xiang would not treat Xiao Xian kindly. However, Xiao Xian did not think that his grudge with Yi Xiang was greater than the Yi family. After all, it was the Yi family who forced Yi Xiang to flee to another mainland. Even Yi Si had said that if Yi Xiang attacked the Yi family, he would annihilate the entire family. He did not care that they were all from the same tribe. But now Yi Xiang seemed to want to kill Xiao Xian more than the Yi family. Xiao Xian only wanted to use the Yi family's war to see how powerful the legendary Yi Xiang was, and to see how capable the people behind Rock Hill City were. But who knew that they would encounter such a situation? When he first came here, Yi Xiang did not react this way. Did something unexpected happen while he was away? Xiao Xian's suspicions were mixed with his wariness. He planned to escape. So be it. His previous plan was based on the assumption that Yi Xiang would hate the Yi family even more. But now Yi Xiang's target was Xiao Xian himself. Xiao Xian did not need to stay here any longer. This was the Yi family's main battlefield, not his. He would be an idiot to fight the Yi family here. However, after trying a few times with his consciousness, Xiao Xian realized that the method he used to leave this place was completely useless now. He couldn't get out. Since you're here, you might as well stay. Yi Xiang's voice sounded like it was blown by the desert wind. He was like a predator hiding in the desert, finally baring his fangs. Yi Xiang's nonchalant attitude changed. Before he even finished speaking, he had already started moving, not giving Xiao Xian, Yi Tuan and the rest any time to react. In front of Yi Xiang, The wall of fire that the bone-reading beasts could not pass through suddenly surged upwards, like a volcano that had been brewing for a long time and was about to erupt. With the wall of fire as its center, powerful flames flowed. Orange-red with hints of white spread rapidly in all directions. Spread again. The real storm was finally coming. Just the spreading flames were like a raging river, forcing the bone-reading beasts to retreat. In comparison, Yi Xiang's behavior in the previous battle was nothing but mild. Sharp, powerful. Murderous without a trace of hesitation. This was the Yi Xiang now, or perhaps the real Yi Xiang. Even though they could not see Yi Tuan and the rest's expressions, it was clear how shocked they were. However, what shocked them even more was yet to come. The wall of fire under Yi Xiang's control that seemed to connect heaven and earth began to change from top to bottom. At the top of the wall of fire expanded outwards like a giant umbrella. Below them, waves of fire spread in all directions. "Oh no!" Yi Tuan shouted. "He's going to trap us all here." Another person beside Yi Tuan exclaimed. Those who came were the best of the Yi family's main branch, or people of high status. If none of them made it back, Yi Tuan did not dare to imagine what would happen to the Yi family. The balance of the royal city was supported by the strength of the 6 tribes. If any of them weakened, the other 5 tribes would turn into wolves and pounce on the weak prey, not giving it time to breathe or rise again. Yi Tuan only had one word in his mind: extermination. Yi Xiang really did want to exterminate the entire family. Yi Xiang had delayed his attack until now because he was waiting for Xiao Xian to come out, then trap Xiao Xian and the Yi family here. Yi Tuan did not know why Yi Xiang targeted Xiao Xian. He only wanted to send the Yi family out. Even if he could only send 1/10 of them out, it would reduce the Yi family's losses. Yi Xiang seemed to have transformed into another person. Although they could not see Yi Xiang's face clearly, anyone who looked at him would feel as though they had encountered a ferocious storm. In the world of darkness, Yi Xiang's wall of fire seemed to envelop the entire world. "Retreat!" Yi Tuan shouted. But it was too late. They could not leave. The Yi family also realized this. Xiao Xian wanted to run when he saw the spreading waves of fire beneath his feet. But no matter how fast he ran, he seemed to be stuck in the same spot, trapped with the Yi family. The world under the control of consciousness was different from the real world. Just like when Xiao Xian discovered the giant creatures in Eagle Mountain, distance was a blur. Retreat? There was no way out. The umbrella-like fire shield above the wall of fire was already covering them, connecting with the flames beneath their feet to form an enclosed space. Everyone felt a chill run down their spines. They were like prey trapped in a cage, waiting to be slaughtered. Helplessness, powerlessness, despair. Yi Xiang's figure formed by flames became clearer, even his facial expressions were detailed. Everyone's faces could not be seen because of the flames. But now Yi Xiang's facial features became clearer. They could see the shape of his eyes, nose, mouth, and even the slightest movement of his sleeves. It was far clearer than Yi Tuan and the rest's images. That was why Yi Xiang had not used his full strength in the previous battle. He had only defended, not attacked. Yi Tuan and the other 2 could not harm Yi Xiang at all, even with the help of the 100-man formation. Now they could not do anything to Yi Xiang unless they used other means. In the dark world, Yi Xiang stood there, his aura strong, cold, and domineering. It was as if he was the only one in control of this sealed world, the true ruler. If not for the fact that the Yi family were the ones being slaughtered, they would have instinctively feared Yi Xiang. Unfortunately, this person showed no mercy to the Yi family. This frightened the Yi family, but they could not muster the will to resist. Xiao Xian finally felt like he had dug his own grave. Chapter 798. When the flames from above and below sealed the area, Xiao Xian suddenly felt a chill seeping out from his bones. Although it was the flames that sealed the area, he felt like he was in an ice cave. His blood and energy were flowing at a slower speed. Especially the energy and energy flow needed to leave this area. It was clearly frozen. If the energy in his body could not complete this flow, he would not be able to leave this dark world. Xiao Xian looked at the floor of flames beneath his feet. This had sealed off any chance of escape. He knew that Yi Xiang wanted to seal him and the 100 people from the Yi family here. Xiao Xian and the rest of the Yi family were like vegetables in a pot, while Yi Xiang was the one adding fuel to the fire. Thinking of this, Xiao Xian could not help but shiver. He could not understand why Yi Xiang was so hostile towards him. Yi Xiang did not even look at Yi Tuan and the rest. Xiao Xian would be lying if he said he did not regret putting himself in this predicament. But there was no time for regrets. Instead of thinking about this, he might as well use the time to think of a way out of this predicament. Xiao Xian looked at the Yi family. He did not know this place well and might not be able to think of an effective way out in such a short period of time. However, the Yi family should be familiar with this place. So, what would the Yi family do in this situation? If the Yi family could come up with an effective plan, Xiao Xian would know what to work on even if he could not replicate the Yi family's abilities. Of course, Xiao Xian would not place all his hopes on the Yi family. He was also thinking hard about how to get out of this predicament. The sealed area was divided into two parts, with the fire wall in front of Yixiang as the boundary. Yixiang stood on one side while Xiao Xian and the rest of the Yi family stood on the other. However, Xiao Xian was alone and did not have as strong a presence as Yixiang. So, at first glance it looked like there were only two sides facing off, Yixiang and the Yi family. The Yi family reacted quickly. Even though the Yi family was less experienced and less capable, Yi Tuan and the other two had already considered the situation. They came up with multiple guesses, but no matter which one they chose, they were not confident. In the end, Yi Tuan chose the most conservative option. He did not plan to fight Yixiang to the death with these 100 people. He decided to leave first. This was the first time they had a clear understanding of Yixiang's abilities. After they left, they had to think of other ways to stop Yixiang from wiping out the entire family. Yixiang was already on the move. The wall of fire, which looked like a heavenly wall, was no longer in a defensive position. As Yixiang pushed his palm forward, the wall of fire charged forward with the ferocity of 10,000 beasts. It was as if nothing in its path could stop it, as if it wanted to crush and flatten everything in its path. Not just one or two bone-reading beasts, but an entire wall of fire. In such a sealed space, there was simply no chance for anyone to escape. Even though this was not a physical body, Xiao Xian's back was drenched in sweat from nervousness. He looked at the wall of fire that was closing in on him. There was no way he could escape. He turned to look at the Yi family. As expected, the people at the front were starting to move. This time Yi Tuan and the other two did not use their bone-reading beasts. Yi Tuan raised a hand, holding something that looked like a tortoise shell. Croc croc croc. A series of collisions rang out as if hard objects like bones were colliding with each other. Yi Tuan shouted, reaching forward with the tortoise shell. In the next instant, the tortoise shell in his hand shone brightly. It was not a speck of light like the bone-reading beasts, but a ball of light. The ball of light shot forward like a shooting star. Along the way, the ball of light rapidly changed. Break! In that instant, Xiao Xian felt as if a mountain was crashing down on him. The pressure on his body was increasing at an alarming rate. Whoosh! The sound of wind whipping the flames seemed to spread to every corner of the world. Even the pressure from Yixiang's wall of fire was pushed aside. Rumble! The sound of wind and fire changed into a thunderous roar. Everything around him was shaking. Xiao Xian's entire body was swaying. In his field of vision, endless flames spewed out from the ball of light. The flames intertwined in the sky, and in the midst of the flames, a huge figure rushed out. Xiao Xian stared in shock at the enormous creature. Was that a tortoise? Unlike the tortoises Xiao Xian had seen before, the tortoise that appeared in front of him had a slender body. Its neck and tail were much longer than the tortoises Xiao Xian was familiar with. There were some thorns behind its neck and many protruding thorns on its tail. Its shell was undulating like hills, unlike the snapping tortoise in the Flaming Horns tribe, which had a sharp, jagged back. Instead, it had a heavy feeling like a mountain. Its form was secondary. What shocked Xiao Xian was its size. It was huge. It was almost the same size as the giant beast Xiao Xian had seen at Eagle Mountain. Yi Tuan's bone-reading beasts could not even compare to a single claw of this giant tortoise. An ancient giant beast. This was Xiao Xian's first thought. The Yi family actually had something like this. In fact, the Yi family did not have many tools made from the bones of ancient giant beasts. In fact, they were considered rare. The Yi family's divination tools were all made by themselves or with the help of others. Only a few were passed down from their ancestors. The one Yi Tuan was using was one of the rare artifacts passed down from their ancestors. There had been some ancestral artifacts, but most of them had been destroyed after being used in some incident. This was one of the most precious artifacts passed down from generation to generation. Tribes without fire pits had special burial grounds for their tribesmen, which was their tribe's graveyard. Of the 6 major tribes in the royal city, the other 5 had their own graveyard. The Yi family was an exception. Although they had their own graveyard, many of them preferred to find their own graves. The more capable a person was, the more likely they were to find their own graves. When they felt that their time was up, they would leave the tribe and the artifacts they had would be buried with them. Just like how the Ji family prepared grain in their graves, the Yi family's necessities were their own tools for divination. There were very few people who had the ability to find the grave of one of the Yi family's ancestors, the courage to dig up their graves, and the ability to control the dead artifacts. This was also the reason why the Yi family did not have many ancestral oracles. Yi Xiang was right when he said that their generation was not capable. Their divination tools were not as good as their ancestors. This was also a reflection of their strength. Even Yi Tuan, who held a high position in the Yi family, had to give up on his own bone divination and take out his ancestor's artifact. Yi Xiang's body did not look strong, but it was powerful enough to force Yi Tuan to take out his ancestor's artifact. The palm-sized tortoiseshell could only be seen at a time like this. The giant tortoise opened its mouth and stretched its neck, its throat moving. An ancient and vigorous roar that Xiao Xian had never heard before came out of its mouth. It carried an insufferably domineering aura, as if it had traversed through endless time and space. Witnessing this scene with his own eyes was more shocking than anything recorded in any tribe's ancestral records. Along with the roar, an immense pressure seemed to erupt. Xiao Xian felt the pressure around him increase exponentially. A huge force was crashing down on him. Under this pressure, Xiao Xian felt like a grasshopper that couldn't jump up. He could be crushed to death in the next moment. Xiao Xian forced himself to look up, only to see the giant tortoise propping up its four limbs and running forward due to inertia. Then, the moment before it collided with the wall of fire, it raised its two front limbs to block the wall of fire. Boom! The two giant tortoise feet stomped heavily on the ground. The entire tortoise's body shook violently, the flames that made up its body splashing everywhere. As for the wall of fire, it exploded with countless sparks. The sealed flames under the giant tortoise's feet trembled violently as it stomped on the ground. Like boiling water, the flames splashed upwards with gurgling sounds. Within the sealed area, the flames on the wall of fire and the ground under their feet splashed with the tremors. The intertwining flames seemed to cover the sky and the sun. The giant tortoise's roar seemed to bring people into a strange ancient battlefield. Xiao Xian's entire body suddenly bent under the pressure of the collision between the two sides. Then with great difficulty he straightened his back bit by bit. In front of him, one side was a powerful freak, and the other side was an ancient giant beast that had been released. Under the collision of the two, everything else would be reduced to cannon fodder. Xiao Xian was about to become cannon fodder under the endless roaring flames. Xiao Xian seemed to hear the bones in his body creaking under the heavy pressure. Even though Xiao Xian was not close to the center of the battlefield, just the enormous aura and pressure, as well as the shockwaves caused by the collision between the two, were enough to easily crush him. The sound of wind and fire was like a war drum beating in his ears. Above his head, below his feet and all around his body, there was an enormous pressure and shockwaves that could tear people apart. His vision was filled with flying flames, densely packed. Xiao Xian could no longer see the giant tortoise's figure clearly. He felt as if he was standing in the middle of magma at the mouth of a volcano. Scorching heat waves were rolling all around him. Strong winds whistled like red-hot knives hanging on his body. Every breath he took was like a fire burning in his nasal cavity. It was as if all the pores on his body were wide open and steam was spewing out. The pressure around him was still increasing. The pressure his body could withstand was about to exceed its limit. If this continued, Xiao Xian would only have one outcome: death. Unless he could forcefully hack out a sliver of a chance to live under such enormous pressure and energy fluctuations. He had to think of a way. The Yi family's countermeasure was to use the giant tortoise to resist Yi Xiang's wall of fire. Xiao Xian, on the other hand, had to think of a way to survive, not to mention leaving. Should he use the bone-reading beast like the Yi family? Xiao Xian did not have a bone-reading beast, but he had an ancestor. Chapter 799. Under the immense pressure, Xiao Xian felt like he was in a predicament of ice and fire. On the outside, there were scorching heat waves and flames. On the inside, it was as if his blood had been frozen. No matter what he wanted to do now, the first thing he had to do was to circulate the power that seemed to have been frozen in his body. This was a different world from the physical world. It was a world of spirit and consciousness. Spirit, consciousness, that bright spot. That bright white spot in his sea of consciousness was the core that allowed Xiao Xian to stand here. Xiao Xian controlled the seemingly frozen white power that was different from Yanjiao's fire seed and slowly broke the ice. 1 round, 2 rounds. When the white power began to recover, Xiao Xian could clearly feel that his body, which was originally as cold as ice, began to warm up. However, this situation did not last for long. The power that had just started to become active seemed sluggish again. It was as if melted water had started to freeze again under low temperatures. Again. There was no time to breathe. He had to follow closely. If he wanted to break the ice, he had to break it all the way. Otherwise, if he stopped for even a moment, he would end up frozen again. Xiao Xian controlled the white power and slowly circulated it around the bright white spot that was surrounded by the flames. Some of the frozen white power began to circulate again. 1 round, 2 rounds, 3 rounds. It was as if the surrounding ice was melting again. As the white power circulated again, Xiao Xian could feel that the cold in his body was beginning to weaken. The frozen power was gradually recovering. Faster. Faster. Fireballs of various sizes came crashing down from all directions like a group of meteorites. They directly smashed into Xiao Xian's body and exploded into brilliant flames. But he could no longer feel it. He was numb. Xiao Xian gritted his teeth and endured the huge impact. If this was normal ground, his legs would have sunk into the ground already. However, the flames beneath his feet were responsible for sealing him so he could not sink any further. If this continued, Xiao Xian would be crushed to the ground. Xiao Xian did not have much time to slowly thaw. His body was close to the limit of what it could withstand. If he could not mobilize his power in a short period of time to block the impact of the external force, Xiao Xian would only end up dead. He had to seize the time to control the thawing power in his body, guiding the heat to circulate. Meanwhile, on the Yi family's side, Yi Tuan was in no mood to check on Xiao Xian's situation. He had even forgotten that there was a tribesman here. Perhaps in his heart, he already thought that Xiao Xian had been reduced to cannon fodder. There was only one thought in Yi Tuan's mind. He was trying to find a crack. This was Yi Tuan's plan too. He took out his ancestor's bone oracle. His purpose was not only to block the wall of fire, but also to borrow the strength of the wall of fire and the power created by the bone oracle to break the barrier that was restricting them, even if it was just a thin crack. If Yi Xiang could create a crack in this cage-like boundary, they would be able to escape through it. It did not need to be big. As long as there was a small crack, the boundary would not be completely sealed and they would be able to escape. Crack. Where was the crack? Yi Tuan tried his best to find a crack, afraid that he would miss it. But to his disappointment, there was none. The boundary was still intact, without a single scratch. How was this possible? They had taken out the bone oracle left behind by their ancestors. It could be said that this was the strongest bone oracle they had at the moment, but there was not a single crack in it. What did this mean? This meant that Yi Xiang's power had far exceeded their expectations. The giant tortoise blocking the wall of fire could only hold on for a while. Yi Tuan had no idea how long it could last. Reality hit him again and again, causing the usually calm Yi Tuan to panic. If even the oracle bone objects left behind by their ancestors were unable to give them a chance to escape, then what should they do to avoid being completely annihilated? Yi Tuan racked his brains for a solution. The Yi family was quick-witted and could think of many things in an instant. Even so, Yi Tuan could not come up with a satisfactory solution. It was not just Yi Tuan. The two elders beside Yi Tuan did not rest either. Their brains were probably the most active they had ever been in their lives. What should they do? Just as they were racking their brains, a strange energy wave appeared from another direction. Yi Tuan couldn't help glancing over. His heart raced at the sight of the figure. A powerful aura suddenly appeared, pressing down on the surroundings. Xiao Xian controlled all the power in his body, circulating it according to a specific rule, sparing no expense. The thawed power gathered together, surging out like a tidal wave. Amidst the roars of wind and fire caused by the confrontation between the two heroes, in the world of orange-red flames, a crimson flame that was clearly of a different color suddenly rushed up. It was as if a bolt of lightning had suddenly split open, forcibly squeezing out a gap in this world. A huge figure formed in the middle of the crimson flame, like a battle axe in a sea of fire. Its rising aura turned into a whirlwind, shattering all obstacles around it. Amidst the twisting orange, red and crimson waves of fire, the gigantic figure that appeared once again expanded. Around the gigantic figure, the crimson waves of fire that emerged savagely attacked the surroundings, as if they were a ferocious beast that was crazily expanding its territory. Amidst the crisscrossing flames, amidst the spiritual awareness of the Yi family, the huge figure was like an alien, a demon that crawled out of hell. Yi Xiang was not the only one to notice. He had been looking in Xiao Xian's direction the entire time, not giving Yi Tuan any extra attention. He did not show any signs of surprise as if he had expected this. Bone-reading beast. Why does he have a bone-reading beast? Someone in the totem array exclaimed. Doesn't he have the ability to read grass? Where did he get it from? That's... Yi Zong exclaimed. That appeared when Yin Jiao left. However, this one was even bigger than the flame giant he had seen before. It was as big as the giant tortoise. Back then Yi Zong and the Royal City Army had chased after Yin Jiao's migration team. They had been stopped by the flame giant and had not been able to catch up in time. In the end, Yin Jiao's team had retreated from the mainland. That's the flame giant you mentioned before? Yi Tuan was confused. Wasn't the flame giant Yi Zong had seen corporeal? Why would it appear here? Corporeal? The power of bone-reading beast could be corporeal, but it was different from the one in the spiritual world. It was controlled differently and required more power. To the Yi family, a materialized bone-reading beast was too wasteful. All they needed to do was attack a person's consciousness. There was no need to materialize it. Some in the Yi family recalled the flame giant Yi Zong had mentioned when he returned with the Royal City Army. Back then, some had suspected that it was similar to a corporeal bone-reading beast. However, no one believed that a crude tribesman could have such power, much less the Yi family's control method. So, that's really a giant. How did the tribesman do it? When he first appeared, his figure was blurry. Where did he get the power to control such a huge giant? Also, what kind of person did the Yinjiao tribe use to make such a terrifying thing? Did such a giant really exist? No, he's not using bone reading. That's different from bone reading. Yi Tuan stared, many thoughts running through his mind. After calming down, Yi Tuan could tell if it was bone reading. Bone reading, regardless of whether it was a human or a beast, would have its own unique energy waves. However, they did not feel any aura or energy waves from Xiao Xian at all. If it was not bone reading, then what was it? Even the bone oracle in their hands, although it was left behind by their ancestors, their heirs had been using the best bone oracle to raise it. Only then could this bone oracle be used to its fullest potential. But, a mere tribesman, what exactly did he have in his hands? What did he rely on? The giant tortoise that was blocking the wall of fire raised its head and roared. The tortoise's palms that came into contact with the wall of fire and stepped on the barrier at the bottom shook violently. Countless flames once again exploded from the wall of fire and the barrier at the bottom. Accompanying this was a tremor that could make people fall apart. The Yi family had a giant totemic formation protecting them. Even if there was a tremor, the impact would be greatly reduced. Before this, Xiao Xian was the one who was affected the most. However, at this moment, Xiao Xian's figure stood firmly in the middle of the flame giant that had suddenly appeared. With the pressure gone, Xiao Xian had a rare moment to catch his breath. However, Yi Xiang did not intend to give Xiao Xian the chance to recover. He raised his arm and swung it at Xiao Xian. As Yi Xiang swung his arm, the wall of fire, which had been stopped by the giant tortoise, surged toward Xiao Xian like a flood breaking through a dam. Xiao Xian could feel the overwhelming pressure coming at him, but he had no choice but to face it head-on. He could not retreat, there was no way out. Under the impact of the orange-red waves of fire, the huge crimson figure took a few steps back from the initial impact and slowly stabilized itself. Then, step by step, it walked forward. The giant's body was surrounded by waves of fire. It was difficult for him to move. Every step he took was accompanied by a huge impact, as if he was going against the current. Chapter 800. The torrent of flames grew stronger. Xiao Xian could feel the resistance in front of him increasing. Every step was heavier. The most obvious sign of this was that the ground shook violently with every step the flame giant took. The torrent of flames suddenly split into several streams, rising up like fire snakes and rushing towards the flame giant. The crimson figure waved its arms, its huge palms carrying a ferocious aura. There were no fancy tricks, its movements were not as clumsy as its size suggested. It was fast, direct and domineering, pressing down on the oncoming fire snakes. It was as if no creature could escape from its palms. All the fire snakes exploded at the same time. The fire snakes shattered into countless balls of fire, scattering in all directions. The wind created by the flame giant's arms swept away the flames in front of Xiao Xian. Yi Tuan stared blankly at the moving red figure. He still could not understand. What was Xiao Xian's giant? He could only vaguely sense that it was different from the bone-reading beast they used. A giant of this size should not exist in this world. Perhaps there was another reason for its size? But Yi Tuan did not dwell on it. He did not have time to think about Xiao Xian's flame giant. He was also shocked by Xiao Xian's strong vitality. He thought that the tribesmen would have disappeared in the battle between the giant tortoise and Yi Xiang. But now, not only was Xiao Xian alive and kicking, he was even causing such a huge commotion. Was this the chance of survival that had finally appeared as he had divined before? His ancestor's bone oracle could not create a crack in the boundary. Then what about the tribesmen? Would they see a chance of survival in the midst of danger? At this thought, Yi Tuan focused again, searching for any possible cracks in the boundary. They would retreat as soon as a crack appeared. He could see that Yi Xiang was more hostile towards Xiao Xian than them. Even without looking, he could sense that Yi Xiang had diverted more forces to deal with the tribesmen. Yi Tuan admitted that Xiao Xian's flame giant was impressive and powerful. It might not lose to their ancestor's bone oracle, but it might not last long against Yi Xiang's attacks. However, Yi Tuan did not care. In fact, he was secretly delighted. Yi Xiang's attention was on Xiao Xian, that meant they had more time to escape. As for Xiao Xian's life, Yi Tuan did not care. More and more flames surged out of the wall, and the red giant's steps slowed. Everyone knew that he was reaching his limit, and when he could no longer stand, he would be engulfed by the torrent of flames. When that happened, Xiao Xian would be finished too. The Yi family was relieved that Yi Xiang did not use this move on them. Even with the giant tortoise and the totemic formation of 100 people, they might not have lasted as long as the tribesmen. Xiao Xian could feel the power flowing through his body reaching its peak. Every part of his body felt like an overloaded machine, crackling and rattling as if it would fall apart at any moment. His feet felt as if they were bound by solid and heavy chains. Even if it was just a small distance, it was extremely difficult for him to walk, let alone stand firm and withstand the torrent of flames that was constantly rushing towards him. He could not retreat. Even if it was just a small step, one step back would lead to a second step, a third step, until he was overwhelmed and drowned. All the white power in his body began to circulate. Xiao Xian no longer felt cold. Instead, his blood felt like it was boiling from the constant flow of power, steam spewing out of his body. At this moment, Xiao Xian suddenly realized that in his sea of consciousness, the white egg-shaped barrier that had been covering the totemic flames had started to melt. The shield gradually turned white and flowed outwards. Soon there was no trace of the shield on the outer layer of the totemic flames. Although the white veil had disappeared, Xiao Xian did not feel the white energy leaving him. It was still around him and had not left. Not only that, Xiao Xian also felt that they were in his control. His 5 senses, which had been somewhat numb, sharpened again. The pressure around him was also rapidly decreasing, as if someone had moved a mountain that had been pressing down on him. His body suddenly felt lighter and even his breathing became smoother. Within Yi Xiang's orange-red flames, the giant red figure stopped advancing but did not retreat. It stood there like a silent thinker. Within the Yi family's totemic array, the people who had been watching Xiao Xian thought to themselves, is he finally unable to hold on? However, in the next moment they suddenly felt a huge pressure coming from that direction. It was even stronger than when the Crimson Giant had appeared. What was going on? Even Yi Tuan, who had been searching for a crack in the barrier, could not help but look over. He felt a strong sense of apprehension, even fear. Over there, it seemed like something that had been sleeping for a long time was about to appear. "It's the totemic energy," exclaimed an elder beside Yi Tuan. When the fire seed's power formed a totem, it would emit energy waves unique to it. Before this, Xiao Xian had appeared and left without a totem under his feet. This overturned the Yi family's understanding. Logically speaking, even if Xiao Xian had mastered part of the Yi family's divination skills and could enter this place, a totem would have appeared whenever a person appeared. But they had never seen a Yinjiao totem appear under Xiao Xian's feet. Was the kid finally forming a totem? No, he was just starting to form a totem. This was unbelievable to the Yi family. He could not even form a totem, yet he was able to walk around peacefully. This totem had come too late. Also, why was there such a huge commotion when the kid formed a totem? Just the early stages of the totem's formation already gave off a great pressure. Was Yanjiao's totem really that powerful? Wait, that's not Yanjiao's totem. Yi Tuan was shocked. He sensed something strange. That's definitely not Yanjiao's totem. But what I sensed was the prelude to the totem's appearance. If it's not Yanjiao's totem, what is it? Asked the elder beside Yi Tuan. Just as the Yi family members were guessing, The flood that was about to drown the crimson figure was suddenly pushed aside, as if it had met with an obstacle. It was as if a pair of invisible hands had blocked the onslaught of flames. Around the flame giant, the torrent of flames that had been constantly attacking the flame giant was separated. But Yi Tuan's group and Yi Xiang did not pay much attention to this. They were staring at the white flames that had suddenly appeared under the crimson giant's feet. 2 white lines of fire crisscrossed, forming 8 at each end. The 2 lines of fire looked like 2 elongated gongs, stacked vertically and horizontally. The 2 crisscrossing work runes were still expanding, and the torrents of flames were also blocked. The space around the flame giant was also getting bigger and bigger. "What the hell is that?" someone shouted. He had never seen a tribe's totem in that shape. Wasn't that a Yinjiao? Wasn't Yinjiao's totem double-horned? Why was this happening? Many in the Yi family's totem formation took several steps back uncontrollably, as if a great pressure was pushing them away. Even Yi Tuan took great effort to steady himself. He did not retreat but still felt an oppressive pressure. If he had a physical body he would have coughed up blood. If one could see Yi Tuan's eyes, they would see shock and fear in them, as though he had seen something unimaginably terrifying. That's... Yi Tuan felt a cold electric current coursing through every hair on his body. His hair stood on end as he shivered. Fear? Worry? In that moment these emotions were pushed to the back. Yi Tuan's only thought was, why did this pattern appear in this situation? The atmosphere was a little strange. Even those who did not understand what the dual rune represented could feel the uneasiness of the 3 elders led by Yi Tuan. Their hearts sank. The white flames in the shape of a cross caused the entire battlefield to stop momentarily. Yi Xiang's hand trembled as he held the bracelet. The flame giant's appearance did not affect Yi Xiang, but the white flame pattern did. On Xiao Xian's side, changes did not stop because of the double horn pattern. Xiao Xian felt as if there was a tyrannical force rushing up from under his feet. As the white flames expanded, the force became more intense, as if it wanted to break through everything around it and crush everything in its path. Xiao Xian's figure, which was originally made of flames, seemed to merge with the flame giant when it appeared. But now white flames appeared from all parts of Xiao Xian's body, pulling behind him. Xiao Xian's figure became clear again. Half a step behind Xiao Xian, the white light that seeped out began to gather again, no longer spreading in other directions. The gathering ball of light continued to expand. Even the light from Yi Tuan's oracles paled in comparison. If the giant tortoise's white light was like the stars in the night sky, then the white light gathering behind Xiao Xian was like the sun that illuminated the world. The white light gathered to form a blurry figure. It was not large like a clone of Xiao Xian, but the flames were different so it was not clear. Based on the Yi family's standard, the blurry figure was like Xiao Xian when he first arrived, an unstable newbie who could vanish at any time. But contrary to the Yi family's perception, the moment the white blurry figure appeared, the 3-way stalemate on the battlefield changed again. Due to the appearance of the white double-work runes, a large area of empty space was revealed around the flame giant. From time to time, some white flames would jump up and down, and the tyrannical might that the flame giant displayed was several times stronger than when it first appeared. In this situation the Yi family's totemic array appeared weaker. Yi Tuan felt stifled, a mouthful of blood stuck in his throat. He could neither swallow nor spit it out. The Yi family had a 100-man array and the help of their ancestors' oracles. Yi Xiang was an old monster who had lived for more than 1,000 years, a once-in-a-thousand-years genius in the Yi family. And Xiao Xian? What did he have? He was just a barbaric tribesman. Yi Tuan felt stifled. But when he thought about how Xiao Xian's transformation could cause trouble for Yi Xiang and create an opportunity for them to retreat, Yi Tuan felt much better. But why did he see that huge figure with white runes charging towards them? Chapter 801. The flame body was sturdy and solid as if it was a real person. The crimson flame giant seemed to have broken free of its chains and mud. Its steps were light, free, carefree. The giant's steps quickened, from walking to running. The roaring of the flames on his body was like the roars of thousands of ferocious beasts. Each of them was roaring, and when they gathered together, they emitted an earth-shattering pressure. Wind and fire swirled around the giant's body as it ran, flames as sharp as knives bursting outwards with each step. Yi Tuan had thought that the tribesmen would attack Yi Xiang after his transformation. After all, Yi Xiang was the one who trapped them here. If they worked together, they would have a chance of breaking out of this boundary. However, No one expected the powerful crimson giant to change its path and charge towards the Yi family. The white pattern beneath the giant's feet kept the flames at bay. Yi Tuan could see a figure at the giant's feet. The figure was almost one with the flames on the giant's body, but the color was darker and blurrier. Still he could see a figure standing there. It was Xiao Xian, the one who created the flame giant. Other than Xiao Xian, there was another figure behind him, glowing with a white light that could not be ignored. It was almost the same size as Xiao Xian. No one knew what the white figure was, but everyone who saw it instinctively felt uneasy. The three silhouettes moved in unison as if they were a single entity. Why is he running towards us? Someone in the Yi family's totemic formation asked in a trembling voice as he saw the approaching figure. I don't know, he's not going to fight us with Yi Xiang, is he? I knew that tribesman was with Yi Xiang. They're definitely working together. They had just been wondering what the white flame pattern was, but now they were too frightened to think about anything else. They stared straight at the crimson giant. Yi Tuan and the other two thought that Xiao Xian had changed his mind at the last minute and was going to fight them with Yi Xiang. If that was the case, they would have no chance of escaping. Yi Xiang alone was troublesome enough. With the addition of this strange tribesman, they were in a dire situation. They might even be wiped out. However, as the flame giant got closer and closer, they noticed that the flame giant wasn't charging towards them, but towards the enormous tortoise that was blocking the wall of flames. The giant tortoise. The tribesman's target was the giant tortoise. What's he doing? Was he really going to fight them with Yi Xiang? Without the protection of the giant tortoise, the flame wall would come straight for them. Even with the protection of the totem array, they might not be able to survive under the pressure of the flame wall. However, in next to no time, all their surprise, bewilderment, and anxiousness were tossed to the back of their minds. Because they saw a scene that caused their scalps to go numb, and they were astounded to the point they were unable to make a sound. It was as if someone had choked their throats, and a coldness that caused their entire bodies to be on the verge of being frozen arose within them. They saw the flame giant grab the giant tortoise's tail, which was almost as long as its shell, and drag it away from the wall of fire. The tortoise's claws, which had been blocking the wall of fire, shot out sparks as they left the wall. Ignoring the approaching wall of flames and the surging waves of orange-red flames, the flame giant grabbed the tortoise's tail with its two large hands and pulled it back. The flames that kept surging out of the barrier at the bottom were pulled back by the giant tortoise, as if they were pushed against the waves of the sea. Even though the giant tortoise was only made of flames, it was as heavy as a mountain. Every step the giant took caused the ground to tremble even more violently. His originally brisk steps became heavy once again. Xiao Xian could feel the bones in his body making cracking sounds. It was as if his entire body was once again in an overloaded state. All of his strength was unleashed without reservation. The immense pain from overloading his body gave Xiao Xian an indescribable sense of pleasure. Every ball of fire on the giant's body seemed to become a part of Xiao Xian. He was only standing at the giant's feet. When he looked at the tortoise and the wall of fire, he struggled to lift his head. But now Xiao Xian no longer felt that way. He looked at Yi Tuan and the others at the same level. The giant's gaze was his gaze. The giant's hand was his hand. Flames spewed out of the flame giant's body like burning blood. Xiao Xian felt like he was on an ancient battlefield, fighting with all his might. Live or die. If he didn't want to die, he had to fight. The giant's flaming arms dragged the tortoise's long tail. It roared as if it wanted to tear apart the world of fire. The rising flames seemed to be cheering it on. Under the flames, Xiao Xian felt a strange emotion brewing in him, ready to burst out at any moment. Xiao Xian felt like this was the fiercest eruption he had ever unleashed since he came to this world. It was also the most complete fusion with the strange white power. The giant tortoise's four palms left the ground. Its enormous body was forcefully lifted into the air. Everyone who saw this scene fell into a daze. This was Yi Tuan's first time witnessing and experiencing Yanjiao's brutality. Yi Tuan had a vague guess as to what the flame giant wanted to do. Stop. Stop. Yi Tuan wanted to roar, but he found that he could not. All his composure was gone. The giant did not seem to be wielding a giant tortoise, but a giant meteor hammer. It easily dispersed the torrents of orange flames coming from Yi Xiang's fiery wall. The scattered flames howled like beasts caught in a hurricane. The crimson flames around the giant continued to rise, bursting with even more power. The crisscrossing gong pattern under its feet grew brighter. As the giant tortoise was spun faster and faster, the giant's arms that were holding onto the tortoise's tail swelled once again. Dozens of streams of flame burst forth from the tortoise's body, as if it could not suppress the blood that was spurting out. However, the movements of the giant's arms did not slow down, and the hands that were holding onto the tortoise's tail did not relax. When the strength reached a peak, the tortoise's spinning motion changed. Turn leg, turn body, smash. He swung his arms fiercely, propelling his tortoise body. The tortoise's back smashed down fiercely like a meteor hammer. In that instant, when the power reached its peak, the flame giant's figure blurred, including Xiao Xian's and the white figure behind Xiao Xian. The blurry silhouette was like a bonfire blown by the wind, about to disappear in the next moment. However, it felt completely different. The three figures merged into one. A heroic howl seemed to pierce through time and space, drowning out the sound of the wind and fire, drowning out the giant tortoise's angry roar, drowning out everything. Yituan felt as if he was looking at the soul of a flame that had burned for billions of years. Boom. It was as if countless thunderbolts had exploded at the same time. The deafening boom made everyone lose their sense of hearing. Their nerves were numb from the shock. No one could remain unaffected by this. Even the Yi family's totemic formation was shaken to the point of dispersing. Even with the protection of the Yi family's totemic formation, the totemic formation was also shaken to the point that it looked like it was going to collapse at any moment. The torrent of flames that rushed over were all dispersed in an instant, and the exploding flames filled every corner of the enchantment. The flames that formed the array beneath everyone's feet were thrown high into the air. Countless curtains of fire, accompanied by fireballs of various sizes, rushed upwards like meteors. They were frail figures trapped in the curtains of fire and meteors, so minuscule that they could be easily dispersed. It was as if the entire world was being turned upside down. The sealed enchantment, under the huge impact and vibration, revealed the dark background below. If one looked down from above, they would see many black cracks on the enchantment below. They were like black lightning that appeared in the fire, constantly twisting and changing shape in the vibration. Yituan looked at the array beneath his feet, at the black cracks that looked like twisting pythons. His mind, which had been in deep thought, went blank for a moment. His voice trembled. It's broken. However, no one could hear him now. Everyone was under the immense pressure of the world being turned upside down. The Yi family's biggest pillar of support, the totem formation guarded by 100 people, was like a fire seed. The orange-red flame at the core of the totem formation was like a candle flickering in the wind. No one knew how long it could last. However, in this world of fire, the huge, crisscrossing duplex character pattern formed by white flames was like a mark deeply engraved on a hard rock. No matter how the fire hit it, no matter how the surroundings shook, it still maintained the clear shape of the pattern, as if nothing in this world could change it. Chapter 802. In the heavily guarded courtyard of the Yi family's mansion, the tense atmosphere grew heavier. Those who could not keep their cool paced in circles anxiously, not daring to make a sound lest they disturb the people in the courtyard. The broken bone in front of Yituan had already made their hearts sink. When no second bone broke, they heaved a sigh of relief. However, they waited and waited. Days passed. Although the courtyard was undisturbed by the totem, many could no longer maintain their composure. It was not physical torture but psychological pressure. Some wanted to wait, but the waiting only made them extremely haggard. Their footsteps were light, as if they had not eaten or slept well for days. There were many such people. Some even fainted while waiting. The mental and psychological pressure was unbearable even if they did not do anything physically taxing. Moreover, this had been going on for a long time. It's good news that there's no movement, someone thought. At the very least, there were no signs of broken bones or broken stones. It seemed that the situation over there was still stable. Nothing must happen. Otherwise, the Yi family will be in trouble. The people around the Yi family were anxious. Ever since the Yi family closed their doors, there had been a constant stream of people coming to investigate. Some were from the other 5 tribes in the royal city, while others were from other places. Although they seemed to be worried for the Yi family, they had ill intentions. If the Yi family was in danger, they would take advantage of the situation. Friendship? In the face of benefits, the 6 tribes in the royal city never cared about friendship. If any of the other tribes were in danger, the Yi family would also intervene. Therefore, as fortune tellers, they knew better than anyone what the consequences would be. On this day, after a short rest, they returned to the courtyard. Go back and rest. We'll keep watch. The leader said to the people in front. Now there were two groups of people taking turns to guard and rest. In front of them was a man sitting on a leather cushion near Yi Tuan. He had dark circles under his eyes and his eyes were lifeless. His hair was messy and his clothes were stained with mud. This would never have happened in the past, but now, everyone was used to it and no one cared. Just as the two groups were about to switch, the person who got up from the beast hide massaged his numb and stiff legs. He was about to say something when he shuddered and looked at Yi Tuan's group. In the courtyard, the tortoise shell in Yi Tuan's hand glowed brightly. The bone pieces in the shell jumped rapidly. Everyone stared at the tortoise shell in disbelief. Naturally, they knew what the changes to the tortoise shell meant. He even used the oracle bone artifact left behind by his ancestors. Is Yi Xiang really that powerful? I wonder how the battle is going. Many people whispered. No matter how much they tried to comfort others, there was only one thought in their minds: danger. Yi Tuan was forced to use his ancestors' oracle bone artifact. What kind of dire situation was that? Seeing this, the people who were supposed to take turns to rest did not leave. They returned to guard the courtyard. How could they be in the mood to eat at a time like this? They would not be able to sleep even if they went back. Just like that, the days passed. The people in the courtyard grew more haggard. The guards outside the mansion also grew restless. Everyone was panicking and some were already having other thoughts. After a period of time, the weather gradually became hotter. The people who were guarding the courtyard, although they were sweating profusely due to their anxiety, felt waves of coldness from their bones. Something was wrong. Something seemed to be suppressing the totem formation again. It felt like it could not hold on any longer. Suddenly, the totem in the courtyard grew brighter. The energy waves from the totem became more obvious and unstable, as if a hammer was pounding on it. What's wrong? What's going on? They did not know what was going on and could only worry. Not long after, they heard a crisp crack sound. The sound was not loud, but it was as if their nerves had been snapped. The people in the courtyard stared at the tortoise shell in Yi Tuan's hand, their eyeballs about to fall out. Their faces were pale, large beads of sweat rolling down their foreheads. They did not even bother to wipe it off, petrified as they stared at the tortoise shell. Impossible. Impossible. The person closest to Yi Tuan stared at the tortoise shell, his lips trembling as he spoke with a sharp, piercing voice. On the turtle shell in Yi Tuan's hand, where even the Gongjia family's sharpest sword would not be able to leave a mark, there was now a crack in the shell. Soon, they did not have time to stare at the tortoise shell because the totem in the courtyard was flashing even more violently. It could not even maintain its shape. It was about to break the formation. Wu, the totem that almost covered the entire courtyard, flashed rapidly before exploding. Sparks flew like meteors across the night sky and were extinguished. The people in the courtyard gasped. The person closest to Yi Tuan strode forward to support Yi Tuan. Before he could ask, Yi Tuan spat out a mouthful of blood and roared, "That Yin Jiao." After that, Yi Tuan's eyes rolled back and he fainted. The other two elders beside Yi Tuan were not unconscious, but they were not much better off. Their faces were pale and they looked older than ever. They struggled to keep their eyes open and their withered bark-like hands trembled. If not for someone supporting them, they would not have been able to sit and would have fallen to the ground. Behind Yi Tuan and the other two, in the 100-strong formation, many people had fainted with blood oozing out of their orifices. It was difficult to tell how badly they were injured, but everyone who saw this knew that they had lost this battle. They had lost terribly. The Yi family was in for a major upheaval. As for what Yi Tuan said before he fainted, some people began to ponder. Wasn't he going to fight Yi Xiang? Why would Yi Tuan mention Yin Jiao? And the first thing he said was Yin Jiao. He did not even mention Yi Xiang. Yin Jiao? Why would Yin Jiao be involved? The Yi family was in chaos. In the royal city, the other tribes who had been keeping an eye on the Yi family also heard the news and began to move. Far away from the royal city, on another continent, at the foot of a mountain range near Eagle Mountain, Xiao Xian suddenly opened his eyes and took a few deep breaths. The feeling of dizziness and exhaustion faded a little, but his muscles were still trembling. The feeling of overload was still there and his clothes were all soaked in sweat. Cha-Cha heard the noise and hurried over to call out to him. I'm fine. Xiao Xian waved his hand weakly. Even raising his arm was difficult. After resting for a while, Xiao Xian felt that he had recovered some of his strength and slowly stood up. Only then did he realize that the place where he was originally sitting had a crisscrossing double eye pattern. It looked like a mark left behind after the rocks on the ground had been melted. After thinking for a while, Xiao Xian still couldn't understand why this happened. The rumbling of his stomach made Xiao Xian feel very hungry. He got up and walked towards the forest, planning to find something to eat first. After a few steps, Xiao Xian sensed movement from Yi Zhong's side. He looked over and saw Yi Qi glaring at him with bloodshot eyes. You. Yi Qi pointed a trembling finger at Xiao Xian. He spat out a few more mouthfuls of blood and fainted. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.